Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Social Work Committee. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available on the Council website for public viewing. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you're not addressing the meeting, writing speak in the chat function when you want to contribute. If you're in the hall, you can do this on your iPhone or iPad. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, including any notes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period or write leave in the Teams chat function, then join when you rejoin the meeting so we can keep track on whether the meeting is quorate. All members should speak clearly, taking their time and speaking directly into the microphone when making contributions. And when referring to reports, please provide the reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus on contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. So, agenda item number 1, redundant apologies and chair approvals of members' remote participation. Claire, can you please provide the redundant indicating who's participating remotely and any apologies, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I can confirm we've got 19 members present this morning. We've got apologies from Councillors Carruthers and Wood. I should say that since the papers were published, John Young has been replaced on this committee by Andy Ferguson. So we've got 11 members in the hall and 8 members present on Teams, being the Vice Chair, Councillor Davis, Councillor Howie, Ingalls, Maureen Johnston, McFarlane, Scobie and Walters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'd like to welcome you back, Councillor Ferguson, and also I confirm my agreement to participation of members named as participating remotely. So, agenda item number 2, are there any declarations of interest, please? No. Thank you, everybody. Item number 3, the minute of the previous meeting from the 16th of May 2024. This minute is for noting. Are members happy to note the minute? Yes, thank you for that, members. So item number 4, Social Work Services Review Budget Monitoring Report 2023 to 24 for the period ending the 31st of March 2024. This report details the social work services outturn position for 23-24, and that following the application of 1.295 million corporate budget pressures, funding is agreed to addressing the previously highlighted increased demand in residential placements and family placements. Social work services returned a balanced position. The report also provides an update on the planned implementation of additional investment measures for 24-25. Janet Sutton is available to answer questions. And Janet, if you have any further comments to make, please feel free. Thank you.
Nothing to add to the report, Chair.
Thank you very much, Janet. Do we now have any questions from members? No, don't think so.
George Jameson and Linda Norwood.
Don't see their hands on it. Thank you. Who was first?
George.
Councillor Jameson, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. My query refers to page 16 and 17, 4.4, 4.5, 4.8, 4.11. It's just the recognition that extra funding through the Corporate Budget Pressure Fund was required, particularly due, as you mentioned, foster and care and family placement. The prediction is that will come down, which I would like to see what the evidence is for that. Just how confident can we be, given that we know that these things can be how long as a piece of string. The other thing of relevance in this particular situation is that the funding for the kinship intensive support, foster care, increased support for the overreach team is identified to help reduce that pressure. The other complexity is that part of the mitigation of balance the budget is the inability to hire staff, social care staff. So there's a lot of complexity there, and it's how we square the circle there. The corporate budget pressure fund is there for eventualities, but how likely is it that we'll have to dip into that again? And how confident really can we be in the predictions that these numbers will reduce? So it's complex, so really I'm asking how confident can we be, and how likely are we to have to go into the corporate budget pressure fund again? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Points well made. Actually, could I pass that over to Janet, or would you like to answer yourself? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. I'll answer one point and I'll pass over to Charles Rocks to give more detail around some of the additional monies to mitigate. So the question around, are we likely to have to use corporate funds again in the current year? The answer is yes, we are, and I think that you'll see that in the next paper. We have seen an increase in the numbers of children and young people requiring these placements, and we did predict that last year based on the number of families in the care system who were, you know, on the edges of requiring additional support. So the mitigating factors around kinship care, etc., for the longer term. And you asked about how confident we are. What I'll do is I'll pass you on to Charles Rocks, the Head of Children, Families and Justice Services, to give some detail around the work that's ongoing currently, Charles, and you know your confidence of how the system will change within that.
Through yourself, Chair, Councillor Jameson, thanks for the question. There's a couple of points just probably want to highlight is about the review we've undertaken around both our family support and intensive services offer to families, in which identified, you know, significant gaps around children who are ages of care. So part of the funding has been designing a new service spec that will both meet the needs both in East and West of the Authority of Children in Ages of Care. Now, there's a timeline of that in terms of the recruitment, the design, the practice model, the support that's around, how that is connected with whole systems, with partners, particular colleagues in education, around some of the developments that we require. That's not going to provide immediate responses to some of the challenges and demands that we have. What we also have undertaken is a huge level of analysis around our current out-with placement population, which is highlighting a significant number of our children are not necessarily new entries within the care system. They're children within current foster placements or kinship placements that have broken down because there's not been that scaffolding support. So that investment around the kinship funding is incredibly important in terms of being able to provide that additionality as well. But this will take time in terms of embedding and implementation of that funding into that support, which we need to influence as well as a kind of whole systems approach in terms of actually the complex need that children are experiencing just now. So as Stephen highlighted, in the short term, we don't necessarily see there will be significant changes to these pressures that we're experiencing, but we hope this will alleviate some of the new pressures coming in terms of reducing the requirement for children to come into the care system. And then the next challenge is about returning our children who are out with placement back into Dumfries and Galloway. What I have highlighted is out with placements and is probably the most unpredictable cost pressure that I've experienced in my career because of the nature of decision making that takes place in terms of crisis, but also statutory orders that are also placed within the local authority as well from Children's Here, and the predicting around that in terms of that analysis has got far more sophisticated, and we have got a good sense of intelligence in terms of the numbers that we have that we've been supporting well. Hopefully that picks up some of the points I've undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. I think that was a honest and frank response. Yes.
And apologies, Councillor Jameson, I forgot to make reference to your staffing question as well. We've acknowledged the difficulty in recruiting social work staff with a professional qualification. That's a pressure across all social work functions. But where we've been successful previously is the support staff, the social work assistants, etc. We do have much more success in recruiting those positions, so that's what we're targeting. So we will hopefully have the people who need to do this, just having that mix.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Ferguson, please. Councillor Dorward, pardon me. You want to come back in? Sorry, Councillor Dorward, do you mind holding while we just go back? Yes.
Just a second. Thanks for that, because it was open and frank, and I think we all realise the problems. It's just important that we do recognise there's going to be bumps, big bumps across the road. It was just one other question. I can take it offline. You'll be aware of the pressures on ASN in schools, assisted support for learning, and the implication of these resource shortages, well, not whether these resource shortage or increased demand. But we know from the work that Hugh Smith and the team have been doing that the majority of these children will be at stage 4 with limited resources for stage 3. So that could increase the pressures on social services, because a lot of these children of assistance, by no means all, but a lot of the children with assisted support needs have got social needs as well. That presumably didn't factor into your thinking as well, because that could add to pressure on social services if the guidance and assisted support needs in schools are not managing to actually do the job in the school. It's going to reflect back there. So it's how we increase that collaboration between the services that will be absolutely key to reducing that impact on ASN pressures in schools. So I don't need a long conversation on this because I don't want to take up much time, but it's just to make sure that you're aware of that.
Yes, thanks for alerting us to that. I think we've got that in control, so I'll let the feedback come from yourself. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks again, Councillor Jimson. Charles Rocks and Hugh Smith are meeting tomorrow to discuss this issue and others, so we'll certainly feedback off table to yourself or to committee if committee so minded.
Thank you. Councillor Durwood, please. Thanks.
Good morning. Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. And welcome back, everybody. A couple of questions. One similar, if you permit me, one similar to Councillor Jameson in terms of 4.5, in terms of the... we're talking about budgets now, so I won't go into the residential placement because there's a different paper on that. But in terms of budgets, what you're saying is that you'll hopefully reduce the residential placements over the next few years for children and young people in care. Given that it's been increasing over the past few years quite incrementally and quite steeply, it'd be interesting to know how you propose to do that, but not maybe for this one, but it's just in terms of, we're talking about money here, so it's hard cash and financials, and it's quite black and white. But I think that's quite an interesting statement to make. It's maybe more aspirational than actual, I don't know, because things are, the placements have been on the up, and they've increased again this year. They're looking to increase again. So it's like, how do you propose to reduce them in that sense? I guess it's about money, but I think it's more importantly about care. And sometimes money is the secondary option, the secondary consideration here. Although the budgets are going up again, and we've put a lot of money into social work services, and rightly so, because it's the right thing to do. However, again, moving on to 4.10 and 4.11, looking at mitigation measures. And again, we'll have further discussion about this later because we're talking about finances, but an allocation of 1.12 million to support the following additional investment measures. Is this how you propose to get the residential care down in terms of that? So 4.11, introduction of a dedicated kinship care team, regeneration of intensive support foster carers, and introduction of intensive support outreach team. So the budget is finite, and how do we propose to manage the pressure on residential care and fostering, which is huge, but we need to pay that. We're contractually obliged to, or statutorily obliged to pay to do that, and rightly so, with bringing in the mitigation measures, which you're proposing to get more funding for. And again, I agree with that. I think it's a good way forward. But how does that's something like, is it over £3 million that you're proposing to put into the budget, which is, when we're looking at I'm not suggesting it's not right, but we're looking at a council that's very cash strapped. What have we got there as a guarantee that these mitigation measures that you're proposing are going to work? And how do we monitor that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Durwood. I'll pass that to yourself, Stephen. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Durwood. You mentioned at the start of your question there around, is this aspirational? Partly aspirational, but also based on research, evidence, and our own experience locally. So when we've introduced additional staff to work with people in a nurturing and strength-based manner and in a caring manner, as you've also referenced in your question, then that's had significant success previously locally. So for example, we went from over 150 children on the Child Protection Register down to, a low of around about 20, and we're back up to about 55 now. Our numbers of children on compulsory supervision orders reduced from 600 down to 350 at a point in time because of that approach. We've then had significant, events, including, the pandemic, cost of living crisis, and we're seeing the impact of that. Now, part of what we have to do is absolutely change the practice model again. So we're doing work around time and motion studies to see what our social work staff, and when I say social work staff, that includes our support workers and all the paraprofessionals and our business support staff as well, in terms of how we deliver those services. So what Charles and other colleagues are looking at across the whole of social work, but specifically children's services about this question, is that practice model. And we do believe that the additional support around kinship is vital, because 40% of the placements that we have made over the last number of years have been kinship placements that have broken down, and where the legislation changed 10, 15 years ago about having to seek kinship placements first and foremost, we never had the increase in staff to do the support. So we're lagging behind, is my language. Intensive support, foster carers, those are foster carers who will take a single child or a sibling group of 2 with extra payment, extra support. We might or might not get those, but we are absolutely going to try. We're also increasing our fostering numbers across the piece. Intensive family support and outreach, we've put it there as a team. It's not really going to be a team, and Charles has mentioned already that whole system redesign that we're looking at. So those are the things that we hope to do. What I would say is the draw on the corporate monies of the 1.29 million, I think I might be looking at the wrong figure, so apologies if I am, but it was around about there. If we look back over the last decade in social work in Dumfries and Galloway, the draw on the corporate fund at the end of every single financial year has been there. I think what we've done this year is said, not only do we need that support, but we need additional funding to try and, shift the tide. So we are confident that we're doing the right thing. And I would say, if I'm being honest, Charles, we're slightly less confident of immediate results, but given the change in practice and the evidence base that we have in terms of research, development, experience from the past, will give us the confidence that we will avoid costs moving forward and then reduce costs beyond then. Charles, anything else to add to that?
No, thanks, Stephen. The only thing I would add is, there is part of this is about setting targets. We do need to have targets to bring this in balance. In addition to that is creating a sort of base value agenda for children and base value agenda for the council in terms of efficiency in that. In terms of that immediacy, this needs to be implemented. And there will be bumps along the road, as it's what's been highlighted today around that. But there's a real commitment, because this is doing the right thing for children. And we feel that there is a better option we can do. What I would also want to highlight is that will mean about a change of risk and risk appetite for some of our children or young people within communities, because we know we've got better outcomes for the children and young people managing in the community than they do have with placement. So that may, see an increase in other parts of indicators in terms of risks and vulnerability. So that's because we're managing the risk and vulnerability within their community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Charles, are you happy with that, Councillor Dorward? Thank you. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Good morning. Thanks, Chair. And I'm just here as a substitute. I think it was for one meeting only. Hence I haven't got my name in the front. Couple of things here, if I can just say. Charles, welcome. It's nice to see you here. I've got 4 main things that come under one theme, and I think the first thing I need to say here, and I welcome Stephen's view on this, because it's a perpetual problem we've got with social work it's the chicken and egg situation, right? Do we spend money to stop things happening, or do we then have to have the statutory intervention to make it happen? And that costs resources in terms of cash and time and everything else. So I think we need to recognise that. That's the first thing. In terms of questions about the report itself, 411, the extra 1.112 million that Councillor Dorward was mentioning there, if I remember rightly, that would have been put forward before we knew about the inspection report. or what actions we're going to have to put in place to write the inspection report into some of these teams here. So the question really around that one is the 1.112 million enough, right, for us to meet the requirements that the inspection report has flagged up? That was that. The next part is at 4.9. It's nice to see the Home Office have actually sent us some money for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So the question here is, have we received any money yet for asylum-seeking men and adults? And if we haven't, what are we doing about it? Because I know COSLA have taken this up on our behalf and they're hitting a brick wall. So I know the chair is very good at writing to people, so she might be minded to write to the Home Office and say, when are we getting our money? Because it must be nearly 2 years now that we've been providing that service and nothing coming back. And then the last bit here, and I think it's more a statement, but I'd like Stephen's view and others' view on this, is if you look at item 5 as well, we're continually using underspends to balance budgets. Right? Is that sustainable? I don't think it is. That's my personal view, but I'd like the professional view on that. And if the view is that it's not sustainable, then what are we going to do about it as a council?
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. I'll pass you over to Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. I'll hand over to Charles for most of this, but you asked for my opinion in relation to underspends and balanced budgets, and is that sustainable? It's been sustainable for quite some time now, but I actually think we've hit a point where it isn't, and hence the 1.12, and you asked if that was enough. It's what we asked for. And I think what the conversation so far today has demonstrated is this is a journey, it's not a solution in one fell sweep. And as uncomfortable as it is for me as one of the council's directors, but also as your Chief Social Work Officer, then we may need more funding as we move forward when we look at the demographics of the change. And I'm not going to shy away from saying that in this environment. My last point before I pass the chance to pick up on the others is in relation to the fostering adoption inspection, which is a paper later on. This funding had nothing to do with that. The recommendations and the action plan that we have in place around fostering adoption we're dealing with in-house, within budget. But what the outcome of that inspection was predicated on, in my professional view, was the significant system pressures that we're discussing today and that have been around for quite some time. I'm also pleased, and you'd probably be aware of this, to announce that the Care Inspectorate are with us currently looking at the foster and adoption team, and Charles and I and colleagues in the team strongly welcome that early look back under a full inspection of the service, so we can hopefully see an improvement in the outcome of that. So Charles, over to yourself in relation to asylum, etc. Charles has just picked up this particular mantle, so I'm delighted to hand over to him.
Councillor Ferguson, thank you. So I am chair of the Resettlement Project Board on behalf of the council, which has multi-agency representation on that. What I would advise is that we're currently doing a cost exercise with the Home Office on the costs around asylum. We have, separate to that, as what you've highlighted, is for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, there is a mandated position that we have that does come with additional resources and supports that allows us to provide some additional contingencies should the children require, for example, formal care under the age of 16 within either residential or foster care. For asylum adults, there are funding streams that are around, predominantly around some of the dispersal schemes. It's actually quite a complicated funding system that it's taken me probably around 10 weeks, 12 weeks to become comfortable and familiar with. But we are doing a full scoping exercises. We're identified as one of 5 local authorities in Scotland by the Home Office offering a sort of opt-in scoping exercise, and we did take that option. That we have had additional dialogue with Home Office because the parameters that they set didn't actually fully cover some of the hidden costs that we do pick up on. And for an example, the Home Office were fully unaware that we still do age assessments on adults who come and arrive, that we then do have concerns that they are actually children or young people. and they don't account for that in terms of some of the funding streams. So we've had some healthy discussions around that, and we hope we'll be in a position in the next 2 or 3 weeks to have a full oversight of what the costs are. Hopefully that's helpful, Councillor Ferguson.
I'll just let you answer that, Stephen. Thanks.
Also, as part of the work Charles was speaking about, I received an email just this morning from the Home Office advising us of £58,500 in relation to support for the adults who come via the hotel accommodation route as well. So that work's paying dividends.
Can I just come in there, Stephen? If possible, could you communicate that out to all councillors, please? Because I think we're sort of waiting for that response, not just in this committee, but probably across the whole board. So thank you. Thanks. You happy with that, Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, can I get a follow-up? Just quick. Sorry, yeah, a follow-up just quickly. I'm back to the underspend part, and I appreciate if you rob Peter to pay Paul, there's a knock-on. And I think it's probably more apt in the next agenda item going forward, because this is historical. We know this is the history lesson part. If we don't, what's the knock-on effect to those areas where we're having to pull funding from? Right? What's the knock-on effect? So the $64,000 question here is, were those areas over budgeted in the first place, right? Or is there an undergoing thing? And if it's the staff shortage is the main reason, I think almost try to read your mind here, Stephen, and you're nodding. Again, it's clear it's not sustainable, because our highly valued workforce are working way more than they ever should, never should be asked to do. So what's the knock-on effect? And I think we need to pay real close attention to that as this goes forward as a responsible committee, actually.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. I'll pass to yourself, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks. A really good question again. And in relation to the underspend, it's predominantly staff vacancies, Councillor Ferguson, that we pick up on. However, there are some areas, so unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, for example, a topic you've just asked us about, we do get quite a generous sum of money coming in from the government in relation to supporting those youngsters. And we've supported them historically using our ordinary, if I call them that, or extraordinary social work teams, because our staff are brilliant. But what we haven't done is we haven't developed a specific support service for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, because we continuously use that additional money, if I call it that, to offset things elsewhere. So we haven't been able to develop specific support services like some other areas in Scotland have. However, the work that Charles is doing about that whole system approach and looking at where we need to target our existing resource differently, we'll take account of that, and we're not going to not do the best planning and the best delivery moving forward because of the constraints of the current budget. We will be honest with you as we are today in terms of this is what vulnerable children and families in Dumfries and Galloway and adults need, and this is what we would be proposing to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And Councillor Scobie, please.
Thanks, Chair. And I spoke to a previous Chief Social Work Officer who obviously had retired, and he told me that his worst nightmare was perhaps being wakened to hear that a child had been put at risk or worse. And we periodically hear in other authorities of children and how they're affected, without the proper cover and so forth. And I hear Charles coming in and speaking about risk. And 4.5 is very much about a budget. And then 410 to 413 is saying how we're going to deal with getting reduced. So I have two questions. And the first one is, how confident is social work that no child will be put at risk? As I say, we've heard from in other authorities, and that was, as I say, retired Chief Social Work Officer's worst nightmare that he had. And the other one is, and Stephen referred to, the changing in numbers and getting numbers reduced. Is what is the change in the climate out there would, other than the figures? And he then referred to one of the figures as increasing. So, you know, what is the optimism in that things are changing from the COVID and the poverty that people are experiencing in Dumfries and Galloway, where indeed more than 1 in 4 children are suffering from poverty.
Thanks, Councillor Scobie. Stephen?
Councillor Scobie, the set of circumstances you've laid out in terms of chief social work officers up and down Scotland not being able to sleep at night, I think is something that we all do and always will carry, because a phone call that a child or indeed a vulnerable adult has been harmed in some way or worse than that has passed is something that does occasionally keep us awake at night. You asked how confident are we that no child will be at risk. There are children at risk in society, and in every society in Scotland, including Dumfries and Galloway, on a day-to-day basis. A large element of the social work system, the children's social work system, is to identify that risk, mitigate that risk, remove that risk, and that is reflected in our excellent child protection practices, our highly committed staff and the work that they do at the front line. And I have said in this chamber previously, if we identify a level of risk for a child that is, you know, unacceptable in the child, or the risk has to be removed or the child has to be removed, then regardless of a budget position, we will spend the money to protect those children and indeed those adults. I can't guarantee to you or anybody in this room that a child will not die in Dumfries and Galloway because of risk that they face. Nobody can. Human beings are wonderful, but we are also horrible. And things happen that none of us can control. I take absolutely no comfort, indeed, I'm getting quite emotional thinking about it, that we cannot guarantee that. But what we can guarantee is our systems, our processes, the legislation, and our priority is always protecting the most vulnerable in society, and we will continue to do that. So that's my response to that element of the question. Charles, would you like to pick up Councillor Scobie's other points, please?
Councillor Scobie, thanks. I probably want to just maybe reflect on that sort of the balance of risk point. I think Stephen has highlighted that we have a number of children who we identify at risk in the community. We have a Dumfries and Galloway Child Protection Register which identifies those children who are at that significant level of risk. That is, as a multi-agency team and as a local authority, we support to achieve change within that and better outcomes. One of my reflections on this in terms of managing risk is balancing the rights of children and the fundamental rights around the promise around children's rights to be cared for by their family, to be cared for in their communities, and trying to shift the balance of care for our 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds. And one of my reflections since I've started in Dumfries and Galloway is that I've got this blessed opportunity to hear children's stories and backgrounds, but probably about 80-90% of the children I have heard about since I've started here are 14 and 15, and that sort of ages of care around risk. And when we highlight risk and vulnerability, we can't mitigate every risk, but for me, it's the focus around our infants and our babies and trying to shift the risk around managing and supporting that, while trying to understand our young people within a strength-based approach to try and shift that to ensure that their rights are upheld to be cared for within Dumfries and Galloway. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Charles. I think these are extremely pertinent points, and over the last year in particular as a councillor, we've seen a lot of work being done on corporate parenting. We've all been to the sessions and training for this. It's also our responsibility to keep our eyes and ears on the ground. We've seen a lot of work on the Public Protection Committee and through COSLA, so I think we all need to do as much as we can with regards to child protection. I thank you both for those answers. So I think we'll go on to the recommendations, if that's okay, members. Are members happy to 2.1 note the following application of corporate budget pressures funding of 1.295 million agreed as part of the approach to addressing the previously highlighted increased demand and pressures in residential placements and family placements. Social work services returned a balanced position at the end of 23-24 financial year as reflected within the appendix. And 2.2 note that a further update in relation to the planned implementation of additional investment measures in the new financial year 24-25 is reflected within a parallel report on this agenda. That is the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report 24-25 for quarter 1. Thank you, members. So we now move on to item number 5, Social Work Services Revenue Budget Monitoring Report 24-25 for the period ending 30th of June 24. This report details the realignment and restructure approach that has been undertaken with the social work management team. The information from the detailed budget realignment has been reviewed in conjunction with quarter 1 monitoring information and highlighted that it is estimated social work services will return 853k overspend at the end of the financial year. The report also details the progress on the planned investment and mitigation measures approved as part of 24-25 budget to address the budgetary pressures and increased demand for children's residential placements and family placements, as we've mentioned already. Janet Sutton is available to answer any questions. And Janet, if you have anything further to add, please do so. Thank you.
Nothing further to add to the report, Chair.
Thank you very much, Janet. Do members have any questions, please? Councillor Dorward, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a continuation of the previous report, but I get it's different financial periods, so it has to be a different report. We are bureaucratic after all, and it's quite helpful. It's useful to know that we're already projecting an overspend. I would imagine that will increase. I'm not being pessimistic, I'm being pragmatic as we progress, but it's really useful to know. Question specifically, I did mention the mitigating factors that you raised in the previous report. So 4.11 is projecting that spend on residential placements will be almost £8 million for the financial year. Due to delays in the implementation of the agreed investment measures detailed in Appendix 2, which is what we spoke about in the previous report. It gets a bit confusing, doesn't it? But I think you know where I'm going. So what are the delays that, because I already asked for an assurance that will these help take the costs down, and now we're seeing there's going to be delays there. So what are these delays? And 2, a more pertinent question in terms of Appendix 1, so the spend, which is on page 27. You've got under children and families social care, it's just my inability to interpret these things, residential placements, and at the bottom in-house residential care. Right, so are residential placements, does that refer to the placements out with the region, and the residential care at the bottom is children in residential care in Dumfries and Galloway? Because that's you're nodding your head, so Stephen, so that's affirming that the difference in the spend, we have, 5 children, or 4 or 5 in Dumfries and Galloway in local authority residential care, and 23, is that right? We've got 23 out with in outsourced private sector residential care. And I think the difference in this, even if you did a pro rata there quickly, which I haven't done, the difference in the spend per place is shocking. So that's an observation, if you'll permit me. But the question is about the mitigating factors and why are they not going to be working as quickly as we thought they might be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dorward, for the question. I'd like to pass over to Charles for that. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I mean, probably, Councillor Dunn, first to pick up on is a sort of the mitigation investment and some delay around that. Part of that delay of setting these services up was around our evaluation that we were undertaking, which included both existing services and both within our care house provision. At the conclusion of that, it was about identifying a service around targeting the greatest level of need. So our intensive services, both from the east and west, and the teams that will be set up, we'll be looking at that ages of care between the ages of 9 and 16 to provide that additional enhancement around support. Now that needs to come with a whole systems approach. And what we mean by whole systems is around education inclusion, and because we have identified that there's a greater risk of family breakdown when children aren't in full-time education. So what are the alternatives that the education are able to support around that? And we've had some early discussions about benchmarking good areas in practice that we can perhaps influence and implement, but that's going to take some time to create that level of infrastructure support. The other element around delay is the hard part of recruitment and getting the right team in place, both from a management and leadership perspective and from the paraprofessional supports that we've in place. And that's currently ongoing, and Vision by October will be fully complemented in that we would have that support. Then it's about learning and development, practice model support, which takes time around good culture and practice that sits with our processes to ensure that we've got the right level of support at the right time around that. To pick up your observation, I think that observation is well known. We've got some additional analysis around that we're looking to pull through. It's slightly referenced in a paper later on around our sort of reimagining our Children's House current internal capacity to what we can do differently, because we do think that's a cost efficiency driver there for us in terms of that balance, but also the ability to influence children and support children at a local context is huge for us, particularly moving on the continuing care agenda. We've got far more influence and scope, because out of our 20 odd children that are out with placement, they are beginning to identify themselves within the communities they're living in. And I think that's a real shame for us that we are losing our children to other areas, and we want to ensure that we keep them in D&G. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Charles. You're okay with that. Could I invite Councillor McFarlane in, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Couple of sort of fairly minor, I think, but might shed a little bit further light. Agenda item, 4.2, where it talks about a reduction in Scottish disability payments of £34,000. I'd be interested to understand what's happened with that. 4.13, it says that there's going to be an excess of additional expenditure incurred in relation to the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Is that money that we will be able to bank, or will that be likely to be clawed back? 4.14, to touch on a point that Councillor Ferguson made earlier in relation to pressure on staff. The last line in that says that we're 200,000 under budget. So what impact does that have in staff, and what does that equate to in staff numbers? On page 29, we were saying that our budget was in 23-24 was the equivalent of 6.3 million. And now what we're saying is that our forecast spend for this year is 11.3 million. That's a significant increase. And clearly, well, I don't suspect that that's sustainable, but I'd be interested to know what we're putting in place in order to make sure that that gets managed. And lastly, on page 30, we've got intensive placements for 48 weeks. And the cost per week varies between 568 and 868. And I'm just wondering why that might be, especially with the external placements as well, where we're talking about £1,000 a week. So there does seem to be a considerable variation in the costs, and I'm wondering if we could get an explanation for that, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Over to yourself, Stephen. Thanks.
I'll hand most of this over to Charles, but in relation to the reduction in the Scottish disability payments, I'll have to seek information and come back to committee on that. I don't have the specific detail unless colleagues do. The unaccompanied asylum seeking monies will not be handed back. As I explained in the previous item, that's one of the areas of underspend that we use to balance the books effectively, and that we meet the needs of those children through our existing social work services. But you know, we're looking at how we do things differently in those spaces. So Charles, in relation to the other questions from Councillor McFarlane, could you please answer those?
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. I'll pick up on just the variation of costs between intensive placements that we have, and the identification is at times is around the kind of level of need and the kind of cost purchasing that we have with providers, and that can vary around providers that we enter into a sort of contract negotiation and spot purchase. That can vary in terms of the levels of cost and spend that we need to have. In terms of the specifics, in terms of the numbers, I'm happy to look into that and come back to you off table in terms of maybe some of the explanation around that, if that's helpful.
Thank you. I'm happy with that. And again, if you can copy us all in, if that's acceptable, Charles, I think members would be grateful. Back to yourself, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Charles. There was another item on 414 where we're saying we're 200,000 under budget at the end of the financial year. I also asked about the Appendix 2, page 29, and the budget in 23-24 being 6.3 million, going up to 11.3 this year. And I don't know if we could get an explanation for that as well, please.
Yes, thanks, Councillor McFarlane. Over to yourself, Stephen, for that.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. The staff impact in terms of vacancies is a day-to-day impact. It puts more pressure on everybody across the whole of the service to have to pick up additional work. It means we have to reprioritise what we do. So we're well aware of that, and hence the additional kind of mitigating factors, bringing in other types of staff, trying to get, you know, levels of employment up as much as we can. That also links to our workforce strategy, which we're bringing an update to the next committee to look at some of the factors we're trying to do to encourage more social work, professionally qualified staff in particular to the region. But the impact of those vacancies is a day-to-day one. It does increase pressure on staff, and we are aware of that. So onto Appendix 2. So last year, the total budget available in this room, like I said, was 6.3. With the additional funding and the mitigating factors put in, that went up to 9.8 available to us. So the projection of the 11.3 is the difference that's described at the start of the report in the round about the £900,000 mark, something around that. We have highlighted the increase in placements, the lack of control over some of those costs that we have, and those are the things that have increased the expenditure so much. Charles mentioned earlier, like in his career, and I would agree, we've never seen such a volatile market, and it's a horrible term to use, volatile market, when we're speaking about children. But given that almost all placements in Scotland are through those private sectors, we have limited control over what they ask for. There are many reasons for that. So we've had pressures such as significant numbers of children coming from England in particular, who are on what we call, or what England calls, deprivation of liberty orders, which is technically a secure order whereby providers in Scotland and providers in Dumfries and Galloway take children who we would ordinarily have in a secure unit, charge ridiculous amounts of money, if I'm being honest, and we have to try and compete with that in Scotland at a national basis. So that's just one example of how those costs have absolutely skyrocketed. Not a particularly technical term, but it's the only one I could think of. But there's significant pressure. So that's some of the explanation. But we are, like I said earlier on, we're confident that when I say change in practice, it's allowing our social workers to do what they already do, but to do more of. So I'm just clear for that for my staff. You know, the practice is excellent. We need them to do more of what they do well. And also the additional supports we have at some of those targeted areas, such as kinship care, the children on the edges of care, etc., will show dividends as we move forward. So that was a rather lengthy response, Councillor McFarlane, but hopefully it's given you some of the information.
Thank you for that,
Thanks very
Stephen.
much.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. So if members are happy, there's no more questions, we will go to the recommendations. Oh, pardon me. Come in. Thank you very much. Come in, Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much. I thought you'd seen my hand. Two things. One's, I just need a bit of clarification here, because if you look at Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 for family placements, in Appendix 1 it's shown a 306,000 underspend, yet in Appendix 2 it's shown a variance of 0. Is that just somebody's not updated a spreadsheet or a column properly, or am I just not understanding it? When you're looking at that, the other thing here, I was looking at yeah, the allegations for this committee actually include some stuff to do with adult care, and we've got nothing in here. I'm just wondering when as a committee, we're going to start getting some facts and figures about the delegated functions that go to the IGB, because the IGB expect us to monitor and look at it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson. What I'd like to do, Janet, are you able to explain the slight confusion with regards to the figures, please? And then if I can go to Avril, I think you've got some information on future figures on adult care. So that will be the second question answered. Are you okay to answer that, Janet? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The underspend on the investment measures on the kinship care team and the intensive foster carers team is reflected in Appendix 1 against the family placement line.
Thank you. You okay with that, Councillor Ferguson?
Just as family placements. And then the other one is family placement.
So, Janet, do you think we might need to amend the papers just to, with a different descriptive? Yeah, would that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Would that make sense?
I think it's a typo.
Yeah.
But it's misleading for somebody looking at it. They wouldn't understand.
Yeah, take your points on board, Councillor Ferguson. As Chair, I would like to just see if that's possible to be amended. Is that okay?
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks for noting that, Councillor Ferguson. And then with the second question with regards to adult care and figures for that, Avril, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Ferguson, on agenda item 7 we'll cover the data report, but what we're including, and we're working very closely with the Health and Social Care Partnership on areas for the report, for the purposes of reporting, so for self-directed support, unmet need, and so forth.
So, if we make a suggestion, we've got to have one committee who's doing children's services and the next committee doing adult, because it could take just as long to do the adult stuff as it does the children's stuff. Because my understanding for the IGB, and I'm still a substitute member, is that this committee, delegation from the full council, is that we will be doing making sure that the inputs and everything else from the social work team into the integration process are actually done the way they should be done. And there's been a lot of members who have been actually arguing for a long time that that should be the case. And we've got that recognition, we've got that that commitment to come here. So it's a case of when are we going to programme it in? Because this department isn't just about children.
Thanks for those points. I'll let you give us an update on that, Stephen. Thank you.
So, you're absolutely right that the department isn't just about children. We've got the non-delegated services, so we've got children and families, criminal justice. We've got small elements of adult provision, such as the mental health officer team. We've got the out-of-hours social work function that covers all elements of social work. But the council has also formally delegated adult social work and social care to the IJB, and it's delivered through the Health and Social Care Partnership, as you know, Councillor Ferguson. So in terms of the scrutiny and the monitoring, the governance of that element, that does go through the IJB. And in terms of finances, there is a specific finance officer for the IJB that looks at the entirety. But what we've acknowledged as a department, and what we as a committee have acknowledged in the past, is that you need more information in relation to how that goes. My other role, which is the statutory Chief Social Work Officer role, makes me professionally responsible for all social work and social care. And what I've developed recently is a social work governance group and reporting to that governance group around quality, performance, etc. And Avril's already touched on a report later in the agenda. Now, as you'll see, there's a lot of detail there, but there's not a complete set of detail. I did say previously that that will continue to improve as we come forward, and we will also be bringing financial information alongside that in the future once we've married everything up. So we will have those. In relation to alternating committees, I'm not a fan of that, because as Chief Social Work Officer, I need to be, looking at the whole all of the time, because there's knock-on effects across the whole of the piece. I don't like artificial constructs around human beings' ages. We're human beings, and therefore we bring those things together. Whatever this committee needs, we will bring. And if we have a committee that's almost entirely adult care because that's what's required, then that's what we would do. But I wouldn't be a fan of separating it like that, because we could go far too long not hearing about one of the functions that we need to hear about. Hopefully that answered the question.
Where I'm coming from, Chair, and I think maybe better just to explain myself here, is the council they set the budget that goes from this council to the IJB, who then commission the Health and Social Care Partnership. Right? So how do we as a council actually have an informed decision about what is required unless we've got the scrutiny and the proper, in a council committee, not an IGB committee, because the Health and Social Care Partnership isn't managed by the council. The two chief execs, yes, it's very convoluted, as you know. But we need to have a mechanism so that we can actually see, as a social work committee who've got the delegated responsibility for it, that our team, right, are A, have got the resources they need, and B, are doing the job that they're required to do. Right? We're failing in that unless we actually see it. And that was the point I'm raising it here. So the question really is when are we getting those figures to scrutinise on a regular basis? Because the IGB committees, and the chair of the IGB is online just now, I've been the chair of the IGB, and I know what the situation is there, is they trust the two partner bodies to actually do their job. And part of that job is to actually scrutinise and make sure that they're actually holding up their end of the bargain. How do we do that if we don't get a chance to debate it?
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. We're listening to your points, and as you know, Avril's worked really hard over the last 6 months with the new set of figures, and that will come forward either at the next meeting or the one after that, because we do need that data. You're quite right. So I'll let Stephen and Avril come in, and Stephen, pardon me, with regards to what you will see coming forward, which will actually help us scrutinise more, which is exactly what's been asked for over the last 6 months to a year. You're quite correct. Thank you.
Thanks again. So there's several different things, I suppose, in terms the word you used a minute ago was scrutiny, and that's critically important for this committee. And I know it might feel frustrating for elected members that a lot of what you do is scrutinise as opposed to making decisions because of the very legal nature of social work delivery. In relation to the council and what it puts into the financial pot for the IJB, that's done through our budget setting process. And as you know, and what you put forward is scrutinised there. And when the Scottish Government gives additional money for adult social work, social care, or uplift in pay, we put all of that across to the IJB. So that's open, it's public information, and it's transparent. What we've lacked previously, I would suggest, at this committee is the scrutiny of the social work services from a professional perspective, which is my responsibility. And that's what I will bring to you. I'll bring that through the data reports, but they're not just going to be data reports as we move forward. They are now because it's a setting the scene, it's a foundation report, if you like. We then have scrutiny questions around why is it where you've got delays here, and I'm not speaking about delayed discharges, I'm speaking of delays in assessment across the whole of the piece. Why is it we've got sickness that's peaking somewhere or another? We'll have those scrutiny questions, we'll answer those, and we'll bring those forward. What's happening from an IJB perspective and a health and social care partnership perspective as well is we're getting reports around the directions that the IJB give back to the council or give back to the council and the health board jointly. They will also be coming here for scrutiny. So that suite of different information that you will get will be much more robust than you've previously had as a social work committee. And I'm really confident that as it progresses, so not first time around, but as it progresses, the level of information with scrutiny questions answered by the professionals and then for you to scrutinise as an additional layer will be in front of you, so you can then inform your decision making around the full council budget setting process if you deem it to be misbalanced, for example. I'm not saying it is.
Thank you, Stephen. I do think we will be seeing some progression and some different figures coming forward, Councillor Ferguson, but thank you for those points. Could I just ask Rebecca to come in, please? Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, obviously, to what Stephen's detailed there, that we're also now producing adult care service plans in line with children and family service plans, the criminal justice social work service plans. So you'll start to see those coming through. You'll start to see the detail of the work that we're involved in, and our deadlines, our plans, our actions, etc., etc. So there's a lot more detail that's going to be coming through that hopefully you'll find useful. Thank you.
Yes, come back in.
Yeah, a small paragraph in the report telling us that would have saved 15 minutes of discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right, Councillor Ferguson. It was discussed as to whether I would be introducing that, but we could have put it could have been put in the report. I actually accept that. And really on the side, I would actually like to thank Stephen for caveating the two officers in this room today for starting the process on the figures, because we absolutely do need it. You are correct. So I think obviously this is the first meeting. We'll get to that agenda item, but we can go forward from there, and hopefully in the next social work meeting you'll see that coming forward. But yeah, points well made. So I think we'll go on to the recommendations, members, if that's acceptable. Are members happy to 2.1 note the budget realignment and restructure approach that has been undertaken with the social work services management team to ensure that the budgets reflected for each service function represent planned income and expenditure levels for the year ahead as detailed in sections 4.1 to 4.2? 2.2, note that the information from the detailed budget realignment has been reviewed in conjunction with the Q1 monitoring information and highlighted that it is estimated that social work services will return an 853k overspend at the end of the financial year as detailed in Appendix 1. 2.3, note the progress on the planned investment and mitigation measures approved as part of the 24-25 agreed budget to address the budgetary pressures and increased demand for children's residential placements and family placements, fostering as detailed in Appendix 2. 2.4, note the progress against delivery of the inflationary increase in fees and charges, which is 3.k, applied as savings to the social work services budget in 24-25 as reflected in paragraph 4.19, and 2.5, note the service reserves that are earmarked for utilisation by social work services as detailed in Appendix 3. Thank you, members. We now go on to item 6, the Chief Social Worker's Annual Report 23-24, which I'm sure you'll agree is extremely comprehensive and details a lot of the work that Stephen and his team have undertaken. The report provides members with the performance of social work services in respect of key duties and responsibilities for which the Chief Social Worker has over-responsibility for. This information is detailed in the appendix and highlights many of the challenges the service has faced along with good practice, and also acknowledges the hard work and dedication of all staff within the service. Do any members have any comments or feedback? I'll let Stephen speak first. Thank you.
Apologies, Chair. I do have an apology to make to the committee. The appendix in the report was a final draft, not the one that's gone to final print, so there are a small number of typographical errors in there that have been sorted, and before it's submitted to the Scottish Government following this meeting, it will be absolutely put right. That was an oversight on my behalf, so I do apologise. What I'd like to say, though, is it's an absolute pleasure to be your Chief Social Work Officer, the Council's Chief Social Work Officer, but also the staff's Chief Social Work Officer, and actually vulnerable people across Dumfries and Galloway's Chief Social Work Officer. There's something I take immense pride and privilege in, and this particular report is a statutory report that I have to prepare every year. Unfortunately, there's a set format for it. I'm not a fan in terms of the format itself because it doesn't give me the opportunity to tell you exactly what I would like to tell you, but hopefully the rest of the agenda today shows the data, the information of the scrutiny that we as a team will bring to you regularly for scrutiny. This has been another tough year for our staff, and previously I've spoke about the backdrop of COVID. We've moved on from that now. This is the new normal. You've been asking me about sustainability of underspends, etc. That's not good enough, obviously, so we need to take a step forward. The one point I would like to make, though, is our staff are brilliant. The work that they do day to day for our most vulnerable citizens is second to none, and I'm proud of every single one of our staff who deliver for us and for the most vulnerable in society, even in these extremely difficult circumstances. They want to provide the best, and sometimes the systems, the processes don't allow them to do so, but we will get it right for our staff as well as for our vulnerable people. So happy to take any questions on the report, and thank you for allowing me a little soapbox moment.
Councillor Jameson, please.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, we totally agree with the hard work that the social care team do. It's awesome. It's not something that I could even start to think about doing, but it is fantastic, especially under the pressures you're under. I'd also like to thank Andy Ferguson, as usual, for reminding us that social care is not all about children, especially reminding me of that. Having said that, I'm going to go back to children. Page 69, under We Will. The point I would like to make is there's no mention really of the interaction between education, social work, mental health positive destinations and employers. That collaboration is absolutely essential, and I know there's groups set up to do that, but I have my doubts it's effective as it could be and should be. We know schools are facing challenges in the ASN, closing the attainment gap. There's problems with inclusion, stroke exclusion, poverty. All of these are affected by social work, education, health, and all the rest of it, and they're all under pressure. And one of the focal points is in the schools under guidance teaching. Now, the average guidance teacher has got about 200 kids to look after. CAMS can't often pick up where they should be, and neither can the NHS, and neither can social work. So we're left with a guidance teacher looking after the problems of maybe 200 kids, and I've done my research, so that's fairly reliable. So my question is, how can we enhance that? Because the overlaps are becoming gaps. So we've got primary school teachers and learning assistants doing the work that maybe a social worker could do or a mental health worker could do. So, but that gap needs to be closed, because a particular section of looking at it is on the role of guidance teaching. There's no actual definition of what a guidance teacher should do. So hence they're having to support children with severe mental health issues, etc., etc. Beyond that, without going on, one of the issues we have is early intervention with these young people to try and help them develop as they go through school. And at the end of the school, we would like them to be gainfully employed. And to do that, we need to engage with people like Skills Development Scotland and our own local Skills Development Scotland and nationally. And from experience in other work, previous careers, we're not doing that well enough. We're working in silos. So what I would ask of you is that we really make an effort to link the school, education, social work, etc., so that we can back to being overlaps and collaboration rather than having gaps.
Thank you very much. I think these are points well made, actually. And over the summer, I'm sure I'm not the only person that's been working on this. And actually, I've had a response from Darren Little, who's the Children's Services Manager, to try and pull all these things together. And I'll let the officers answer the question. But I just want to point out that in his response to me in 2025, there will be a Children's Services Partnership developed, which will commence a programme of engagement regarding our future priorities for children's services. And hopefully we'll have some stakeholders, including myself and others, on that committee. So I think it is really important, and I would totally agree with you, but I'm sure the officers have got a response. Thank you.
So in relation to this report, this is my statutory report. It has a set format, and it is really about my statutory social work functions. I've put a "we will" column in there in relation to some of the things that we concentrate on specifically from a social work perspective. We do have two other significant legal responsibilities about reporting. One is for children's services, as the Chair's just described, and also for corporate parenting, where many of the issues that you have described are picked up, and we are actively working in these areas. But I'm going to have to dispute something that you've said quite strongly, because it sits within my role as Chief Social Work Officer, and that is the role of other professions doing the job of a social worker. I must strongly dispute that in a public environment, because we have protected duties that are social work functions that only we can do, and they are not being picked up elsewhere. I hear this phrase used quite a lot from other professionals and often thrown around, but I am a passionate social worker, and I've got to be really clear that other people do not pick up what we legally have to. There are gaps in terms of whole systems approaches, in terms of who should do what, and quite often professional boundaries in terms of who picks up what are not always properly identified, so there will be gaps. But apologies for the dispute, but I do have to be really clear about my statutory role and that of my staff with a protected set of functions. Having said that, we are looking at some of these issues. I mentioned earlier that Charles Rocks and Hugh Smith are going to be discussing those linkages around some of our most vulnerable people and how we can do things differently. So like I said, apologies for the dispute, but it's my role, it's my statutory role, and I must dispute that statement. So.
Yes, I think that's a fair point, Stephen. Thank you. I take that on board, Phil, and I'm sure
more
members
than, more than happy to accept that. My point is there are gaps. And the research that I've carried out suggests, and quotes from teachers, that they're going home worrying about a child not being there on Monday because they've done themselves self-harm. So they're put in the position of having to support that child without the professional training that social workers have got the qualifications and experience to do. No, this is a fact. These are facts that are coming back from research, that guidance teachers are left with situations whereby they are concerned about the health and well-being of children under their care. So there's gaps there. So I don't want to get any sort of argument about this, because we know there are gaps, because social work stretch, so there's guidance teaching, so there's everything else, but we need to close the gaps. And I totally accept refuting the fact that teachers are not social workers. I totally agree. But they're put in a position sometimes where they have to do things what they're not trained to do.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Jameson. There are another couple of options that I can take up with you after, within schools that you possibly don't know about, because I have researched this during the summer as well, but I'll let you answer, Stephen, thanks.
Another point in relation to, I don't dispute what guidance teachers are saying, I don't dispute that there are gaps, but social workers are not the people who fill in those gaps in relation to self-harm, mental health. They are also not trained to deal with that. So it is actually around health, and I don't have specific influence or legal responsibility in those spaces. So, sorry, I mean, I do have to be clear about what my staff can and can't do. So even though other people might think my staff should fill in those gaps around self-harm and mental health support, we don't.
Okay, I think we'll move on, Councillor Jameson, if that's acceptable. We can take it up offline if you feel you need to and accept that. Councillor Walters, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a sort of general question about page 53, where it says about the number of referrals into the services ASP teams increased by 40% compared to the previous year. That seems quite an alarming rise. And I just wondered whether Stephen or Charles had any sort of, any sort of explanation of why that happened, but also any sort of reassurance that that won't be happening again the following period. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Over to yourself, Stephen.
I think it reflects the increased workload, the increased complexities and the increased questioning that comes from people. I think that's likely to continue, but what we have to be really clear on is that we do respond, reply and try and alleviate situations that are highlighted to us.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Dorward, please.
Thank you, Chair. Talking about the wee wills, but before I do that, which is on page 69, I'd just like to pass on our group's recognition of the amazing work done by social work staff, frontline staff, admin staff who are very often forgotten in that, and also management at all levels. So thank you for what you do. I know our job is to scrutinise and pick out things that you don't do sometimes, but please record our thanks for what you do, because it's very hard work, it's a very tough environment, and resources are stretched in all ways. So thank you. Back to business. In terms of page 69, we will. That's great what you're saying, we will do. What I'd like to know, and you'll not be surprised by this, is how do we measure that, and how do we monitor it, and how do we, going forward, that we are doing what we say we will do, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dorward. Stephen, thanks.
Yeah, so the we wills will be built into business plans. They'll be reported through that. We'll use the Pentana system in terms of progress, etc. And we'll bring those back to you through our 6 monthly, I think we're suggesting, monitoring reports. I did in the past say quarterly, but the enormity of the work is such that, with your permission, we'll be looking at 6 monthly. So it's written down, it's committed to, and it's got measurables, and we'll be bringing that back to this committee.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks. Councillor McFarlane, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stephen, for your report. It's very comprehensive, very thorough, and not too difficult to read, which is quite a say for a document of this type. As per last time, I've got a number of questions that I'd like to ask. On page 49, you talk about the integration of redesigners to allow more equitable distribution of work. Firstly, do we have workforce tools which manages that and make sure that staff are tasked appropriately and that they're not overworked and perhaps not given jobs that were beyond their capabilities and remit? But the second last paragraph on that page in 2023-24, I'd really like an explanation of that, because I've read it a number of times, but I'm really struggling to understand it. On page 51, just very quick one, this one, last paragraph, it says 182 care leavers. I'm assuming that you're talking about clients or patients in relation to that. On page 53, under services for adults, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th paragraph, it says any that fall below the standard are used to promote development opportunities. When we say any, it's obviously a very vague number, but do we have something that we could sort of contextualise that with? And on page 66, 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph down, multi-agency risk assessment, it's talking about a 50% increase in referrals. Do we understand why? Thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. And Stephen, please, thanks.
Councillor McFarlane, if I may, I might have to come back to you on a couple of those points. I was trying to scramble through the report and note them as you spoke, but I might not have picked them all up. So in relation to the first one, so on page 49, the number of children referred to the multi-agency safeguarding hub decreased by 10% to the previous year. Total of 865 children referred into MASH, 487 children discussed at a referral discussion, and 296 child protection investigations. So is it the system you would like me to talk through and the figures as to why they drop off? Just so I'm clear.
Come back in, Councillor McFarlane, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. No, I mean, you just read it back to me and I'm still none the wiser. I just... So it's just my inability to understand what's been written there, Stephen.
Okay, so basically our multi-agency safeguarding hub is where we receive all of our child protection referrals. It's manned by police officers, social workers, and we also have health colleagues there as well. So the total number of children referred was the initial number of 865. When the referral comes in, it's screened, and then some of them are referrals that shouldn't have come into that route, and we divert them to where they need to be. And that's why only 487 of those children then had what we call an interagency referral discussion. So those are the cases whereby we've identified that abuse might be present. The initial referral discussion then gathers more information from all multi-agency partners to see if we need to move forward to do a thorough child protection investigation, which is led by predominantly a social worker, sometimes jointly with a police officer if a crime's been committed, and on a rarer occasion via a police investigation itself. So that's in terms of those investigations. From those investigations, we'll identify the children where we think we've identified risk, and we need to hold a child protection planning meeting, which looks at the detail of all of the information, brings the family, the children together, as well as the professionals, and looks at that. And then if risks identified from there, the children, if we have risk of abuse or actual abuse happening, that chance put on the child protection register. So that paragraph tries to capture that process as best it can. Then that's why the numbers reduce from each of those stages, because once you've done the risk assessment and the follow-up work, it would reduce for each stage of the process. So does that make it clear? And there was a reduction from the year before of 10%.
That's yes, thank you for that.
Okay, I've now got page 51 next, the bottom paragraph.
Still on page 49, I asked about the distribution of work, and do we have a workforce tool?
Okay, so in terms of distribution of work, we do this on a professional basis in terms of somebody's current workload, their skills, their strengths, their qualification, and we have a referral discussion before we allocate work to all of our staff to make sure that that's done properly. You asked about people being overworked, etc. We take the current caseload and workload into account when allocating new work, and we ensure that work is appropriately placed with people with the right skills. Charles and Rebecca and Catherine are looking at workload management at the moment. We've got an exercise starting beginning of September, looking at 2 to 3 staff from each of the teams across our different functions to do a really deep dive to look at what they do, you know, how much is travel time, how much is direct contact with people, how much is report writing, etc., etc. So we have a more thorough understanding around the work load as opposed to the caseload of our staff, so we can use that intelligence moving forward as some of our business tools around workforce development. So there's quite a sophisticated system in place that helps us with that, yes.
Excellent, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane.
And do keep me right in terms of the different questions coming forward, because
it can get quite confusing. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thanks very much. I was just reminding myself, I've Googled something there just now, exactly what this report's all about. And it's, my reading it, used to be IRIS, I'm not sure if it's still IRIS, the body that pulls this all together for Scottish Government, and it's a report from you, and it's your report as Chief Social Work Officer. It's not our report, it's your report to the Council, which then feeds part of the local benchmarking process. And the last one is there from the last time you did it, but the next one, of course, can't be there yet because they've just received it, no the chance. So, I mean, basically this, all the questions we're asking just now are all quite relevant, quite reasonable, but they're part of the normal scrutiny we should be doing, right? And this report is like the diary of Adrian Mole, aged 13 3/4, or what it is for you for the last year, and telling you what's good, what's bad, what your challenges are and everything else. And we need to recognise that, and how do we feed into it? I think it was Andy Mack said there, you know, it's a good report, it's actually easy, it's an easy read, which is amazing for the type of information you've got there. And I'd just like to say, like, well done, Stephen, because it reflects, it's honest, it's brutally honest in places, but that's what it should be. And we take it forward and we use it as a guide, and that feeds into the benchmarking to say where we are with our local authorities. And for me, I'd just like to commend the report.
That's very kind of you, Councillor Ferguson. Thanks. I think we appreciate those comments. I'm sure Stephen and the team do. But you're quite right, there are questions to be asked. So over to yourself, Stephen.
Councillor Ferguson, thanks for the kind comments. And the reports are submitted directly to the Scottish Government through its Office of Chief Social Work Advisor now, so there's been a slight change. I'm just aware that I haven't answered Councillor McFarlane's questions. So if I just continue to do that, is that okay with committee? Yeah. Okay. So,
thanks for that, Stephen.
Yeah, so on page 50, I think I'm on page 51, bottom paragraph. And when we say our team, so this team is our through care and aftercare team for children, and it's 182 people who have left our care, so children who would have been on compulsory supervision orders at home, in kinship, in foster care, in residential care, etc. So the team supported 182. Now that wasn't new care leavers, that was care leavers who they were already working with, and they work with up until the age of 26. And sometimes beyond, depending on the relationship and the level of engagement. So that's what that figure is. It's about our care leavers, our care experienced children and young people. Now, I think I'm on to page 53, and we're speaking about adult support and protection audits. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th paragraph. Through the Public Protection Committee, we regularly audit all activity against our key processes. That sounds really boring. It's not, it's really interesting work actually. And we expect our services to be, you know, either good, very good, or excellent. And if we get any examples that fall below that, as the report says, we look at why. Quite often it might, there's various reasons, but we're really looking at if a member of staff hasn't provided something to the standard we expected, do they have a training need? Or was it because they didn't have, and this is what normally happens, they didn't have the information at hand to give the report that they produced the full level of information that we would expect. So it's very rarely poor practice is what I would say, but it's sometimes that we don't have the information at hand. But we're quite critical in our scrutiny because it's proper to be critical in our scrutiny. Now the next one, I've lost my fingers, so the next one I had... Sorry?
Page 66, and it was asking about 1, 2, 3, the fourth. Paragraph, multi-agency risk assessments. Do we understand why we've had that 50% increase in referrals?
Yep, okay. I had my pencil there, I just didn't know if I'd missed a page, so apologies for that, Councillor McFarlane. Yeah, I mean, the multi-agency risk assessment conferences are, as it says in the report, are predominantly, well, exclusively actually, for women who have been subject to violence almost exclusively from men, and where we've identified risk factors that need that multi-agency approach, that oversight. The reason for the increase, I think, quite simply an increase in violence towards women. Some of this was hidden in the pandemic. We didn't have eyes on as multi-agency partners. It went unseen quite often. And as society's got more back to what the new normal is, we're seeing that violence. Women are coming forward and reporting that violence, and therefore there's a significant increase. It is an appalling increase, but the reason, I think, is largely down to some of the unseen harm that was going on throughout the pandemic, and then the additional pressures that society's experienced in relation to poverty, etc. So those tend to be the reasons for increase in domestic violence: alcoholism, increase and drug usage, gambling as a means of escapism, and then violence from men towards women, predominantly.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Apologies on my behalf that I missed the rest of your questions, Councillor McFarlane. I shall take full blame for that, sorry. Yeah, I think also the White Ribbon campaign's been very, very prevalent, and hopefully women feel they can come forward now, and a lot of great work's been done with Women's Aid. Myself and Chrissy have visited the unit, and it really is exemplary, so hopefully women feel more comfortable coming forward now, if that's entirely possible, albeit quite daunting. Okay, we have the last question at the moment from Councillor Scobie, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I would just carry with the remarks that have been made in terms of the tremendous efforts that have been made to support our communities through social work and so forth. And that's identified in the report, Stephen, under 7 on page 69. But on me to do this, but highlight one particular person that really reflected the tremendous work that we get from our staff, and that's Alison Penman. And I think it is worthy of me to place on record, because Alison worked alongside me with a service user, and that service user actually praised Alison for the empathy that she showed towards the needs of that particular person. And that reflected the level of professionalism that we've got, and empathy that she showed towards.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scobie. I think that's extremely apt, and it was very nice of you to mention Alison Penman as well. I think we can congratulate her on that piece of work very much indeed. So would you like to come in, Stephen? Thank you.
Councillor Scobie, thanks for that praise, and I will ensure that it is passed on. I think it's really promising that that level of thoroughness, professionalism and compassion, I threw the word compassion in because I knew what you were alluding to in relation to the work, is what we expect of all of our staff, and it's good to see that those in more senior management positions keep all of those values as well, and that is absolutely core to us as social workers, so thanks.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So I think we will conclude that item. We will now go on to item number 7, everybody please, and that is the Social Work Services Data Report. This report has been provided for elected members on this committee for the period 23-24. This is the first iteration of this report that sets out data for the period 23-24 for adult services, children and families services, justice services, and also a snapshot of our complaints, workforce and finance, together with a separate appendix for a minimum data set for child protection and adult support and protection, which has been recognised nationally as a good practice model. The format of the report sets out data we hold on our management information system and sets out the scrutiny and findings where data is currently available. Data is currently extracted from the management information system, and work is progressing to produce these reports on a 6-monthly basis for members, set out about each quarter to allow for more scrutiny and analysis, as mentioned before. The reports will set out the direction of travel for each data set, including benchmarking data to allow us to further scrutinise, identify risk and resource pressure. For noting, there have been some challenges in interpreting the data from the system, but work is progressing to resolve these issues, and obviously going forward we'll have comparable data. This report is for our information, and the service would welcome your views on the presentation and any further information we would like to see progressed and highlighted in the future reports. I personally would like to thank Avril Dickey for the effort that she's put into this, which has been incredible. She's given this months and months with the support of both Stephen and also Charles, so I commend you on this report, Avril, and you are here to answer many questions, I'm sure, so thank you. Over to Avril. And do you have any more comments, Avril, before we go to questions? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So it is the first, excuse me, it is the first iteration of this report, and we recognise we have done quite a bit of work, but we recognise that we've still got a lot of work to do to make sure the reports cover all service area activities across social work services, and also to give us that benchmarking data to allow for the robust scrutiny and challenge. Future reporting will cover areas including the resettlement team and the housing options and homelessness team, which transferred to our service on the 1st of April. We'll also be including additional information on the violence against women and children and other service areas that are not included in this initial report. High-level key findings show the direction of travel mainly is on the upward direction for all areas of service activity. And what the data shows that the level of referrals across the service areas for 23-24 has increased over a number of years now. So for adult services, the 19,572 that we referred to earlier, contacts to our single access point, showing a remarkable increase since 21-22. With those requiring significant social work involvement, and what happens to those when they come in, they're directed to the specific social work teams, and that may be our multi-agency safeguarding hub and adult support and protection, our complex care, our homes teams, our occupational therapy, our sensory support and our mental health team. So there is still a lot of work to do. We have had a redesign of our service delivery models within adults and in children and families. So we're working with our management information system to make sure we can get the robust reporting that we're required to present to yourselves. So it's worth noting the mental health team rise year on year. One of the main factors influencing this is a national increase in the guardianship requests and a general incline in the short-term detention certificates. But what this increase does not allow for us to identify is the detail of the work involved, the impact of that additional and type of referrals is having on our current resources. So our social work governance group are currently reviewing ways to support this team. Another area worth noting is the increase in our sensory support team. The increase is by 4 times referrals in the past 5 years, and this is due to a variety of reasons, including our ageing population, the increase in those health-related eye conditions, especially diabetes-related, and an increase in the children being diagnosed with visual impairment. It's also worth noting for the sensory support team, they're doing a lot of work raising awareness about their team, so that has impacted on an increase in referrals to the team. For children and families, again, the increase shown in comparison to previous years, that mainly reflects the change to our current recording methods and the robustness of that, and is now a true reflection of the current contacts to the service. As we progress our management information system, this will be set out clear for us going forward, and the allocation to the individual teams. Again, a new service delivery model was implemented in January 2024, so we're currently developing the system to incorporate those changes and ensure we can get those reports out that we need. What we envision going forward, and this is for our aim is for all service activity to give you that rich picture. So forgive me if I can use the children and young people in residential placement as an example. What we're keen to show further is the journey for each child, adult that come into social work services. So for children and young people in residential placements, we want to set out in the report the age, the gender, the placement type prior to residential, the reason for entering the residential, the type of placement move that our children and young people have, the impact it has on them on entering residential care. That's looking at their education, their mental health, their length of current stay, and also their costing. So we want to start looking at this report and giving you that full rich picture on all the service areas. For justice services, there's a huge change in the national landscape for justice service, including the introduction of the Bail and Release Act 2023, and that driver shift from custody to community, together with that focus on direction to bail supervision and our structured affairs service. So that's the key driver on the delivery of the Justice Service. Currently, the Scottish Government has given us additional funding together with the non-recurring COVID funding, so that's allowed a bit of capacity in the Justice Service to allow to concentrate and focus on that shift from custody to community. A caveat on the court report data in relation to community supervision within the Justice Service data. Given the timeline for the Scottish Government and the work involved in the court reports, the changes may increase in our current reporting figures of 878 by 10%. And then finally, just from myself, our workforce levels and recruitment pressures that we've discussed this morning throughout other papers, they're in alignment with the sector-wide national challenges. But as at 31st of March, 2024, our service had 44 vacancies, which is a 5% total of our workforce, together with a full-time equivalent absence of 14.59 days. So that's a huge impact. But as Stephen mentioned, a report on our workforce plan and setting the bar, outlining the challenges and the work that we're progressing, will be presented to this committee in October. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avril. I really think we all appreciate you summarising the report so clearly, and thank you for that. Could I move on to Councillor McFarlane, please, for his question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Avril, and thank you for this report. I do think it's a step forward, and I do think it's going to be helpful in the future. I'm a little bit confused. I'm not confused, perhaps that's not. I think there may be an alternative way of perhaps presenting some of this. So if I look at under 433, direction of travel, we've got ups, downs, and going to the right. Under drug treatment and testing orders, there are 2. Direction of travel is down. Now, ordinarily you'd say if something's fallen, it's bad, but it could be good. And I think in this case it is good. However, under community payback orders, there's an increase. So is that good or is that bad? And I think these tables may be open to interpretation depending on what's what. And I think we need something that's perhaps a wee bit clearer, just so that we understand. If we look at the table on 431, we've got direction of travel. But again, and I know that in future reports we may well get this, but we've got nothing to compare that against. So it could have been that, for example, the number of referrals was 19,550 last time. It's up to 19,572. But it could be that it was 10,000 last time and it's up almost doubled. So again, it needs a sort of contextual landscape, I think, to help us understand what it is that's saying here. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McFarlane. Over to yourself, Stephen. Thanks.
Yeah, Councillor McFarlane, that's absolutely fair, and I think we were all struck by that ourselves, because the upward direction can quite often be something negative and the downward direction might be something positive. What we'll have in future reports is a set of scrutiny questions for each of the different social work functions with answers from the professionals that will give you more context, and it will therefore give you more of an idea in terms of your own scrutiny, the questions you might like to ask. What I was really keen is for this FEST committee to have the data in front of it. We didn't have the time to prepare and deliver the scrutiny and the context, so an apologies for that, but I was really keen that you could see this and give comments such as you have, but we're absolutely on it, and we'll have that narrative and context in the future.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much, Councillor McFarlane. And the next question, Councillor Walters, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think I'm just following up a little bit on what Councillor McFarlane was saying about the presentation of it. Page 102, I think it's really good to see a sort of finance on a page to make it as straightforward as possible. I just wondered whether I'm interpreting this right, basically. If you're looking at adult services, for instance, if the total net expenditure is the blue part of the donut, and the staffing costs is the green part of the donut, is the staffing costs actually part of their total net expenditure? If that's the case, should that not be better presented as the total net expenditure with the staffing costs as a separate part? Because presumably there are other costs then as well. Because if you look at the justice services, they're almost exactly the same, the total net expenditure and staffing costs, which would suggest that justice services were only spending money on staffing costs. That's sort of two questions really. One about presentation and one about the actual figures. Thanks.
Yeah, your observation is correct. So I'll pass that over to Stephen. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the staffing costs are included in the total net expenditure. And we'd be clearer when we present that in the future. In relation to adult services, the reason there's such a difference is obviously it's all of the services we commission in terms of residential care, care at home, complex placements, etc. And our justice colleagues have very limited access to anything other than staff to do the excellent work that they do, which is reflected in the graphic as well. But we will make that clearer in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Stephen. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thanks very much. Everall, thanks very much for this. This is exactly what we've been looking for, and really difficult, isn't it? Because the landscape's changing every day, right? So if you go to page 82, the social work assessments and reviews, now I'm not for a minute suggesting we go backwards, okay, but in the way forward here, we're showing 5,108 for 23-24. You'll have figures for this year to go in there. Could you break that down and have a coloured bar rather than just a single bar, so that it actually tells us how many are reassessments, how many are reviews, and how many are first-time referrals? Because that would see at a glance. Give a man a picture, he'll understand it better, as they say. So if you could do that, that would be really helpful. And I'm just looking here again at the I don't have to repeat myself here, but adult services are 108 million, as opposed to 30 million for children and families. I think that speaks for itself in terms of how we need to start looking at it and monitoring it. And getting back to the justice services thing, and I know Kath Knipe's sitting there, my own experience of that is that there's a lot of one-to-one work goes on. And it's no case of having 30 people in the room with one teacher. It's usually one social worker or a support worker or whatever it would be there on a one-to-one basis, even a one-to-two basis, maybe very, very rarely. I think the supervisors, I think they're still 1 to 5, are they? Yeah. So the ratio is, you can understand why the staffing costs are there rather than the total net expenditure, because I'm looking at that. That must mean we've only spent £200,000 on extra equipment for unpaid work, which is maybe something we should be looking at, says he, speaking off the top of his head. Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. It's exactly what we want. And as this goes forward, it'll update. And it gives us the information we were asking for earlier. And right enough, Avril was right. She came in and said that. That's a good piece of work, and I really welcome it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Ferguson, for your comments. Councillor Dorbert.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Avril. This is amazing stuff, and it is what we need. I recognise it's a work in progress, so it's not a final article, and it's very easy to constructively criticise the work done by somebody else. So we have the easiest option here. So thank you. It must have taken you months to get this all in place, or the only one thing I would maybe add, and it's not a it's a small point, is on page 87, unmet need, which is quite concerning. But could we have that perhaps, or look at that as a percentage of total? Is that reasonable to ask, just to get a context in that way? Thank you.
Thank you. We certainly can do that. What we're actually doing at the moment, we're doing a big piece of work. We've got a working group pulled together to undertake a review of the unmet need and just really analysing that. So that report will be due at the end of the summer in the next few weeks.
Thanks, Councillor Dorward. So we can now go to the recommendations, I think. Or have we got any more questions? No, I think we're fine. We can now go to the recommendations. Are members happy to note the content of the Social Work Service Data Report provided at Appendices 1 and 2, noting that this is the first iteration of the report set out for 23-24, together with the previous year's data where available. So thank you, members, and thank you again, Avril and team. So I just want to check with members, would you like a comfort break, or will we continue on till 1 o'clock, which might be an actual lunch break? I'm not sure if lunch is provided today or not, but what do members feel? If I could get some feedback on that. Keep going? Yeah. Everyone else okay with keeping going? Yeah, okay. So we will move on to item 8, Head of Service Supplementary Information for End of Year Assessment, first April 23 to 31st of March 24 of Social Work Service Plan. The intention of this report is to provide supplementary information on Head of Service End of Year Assessment and the delivery of the 23-24 Service Plan. The information presented has been measured against the milestones that were set out in this plan for each action. The report details a number of areas progressed and achievements which the service has led on, contributed to, with supplementary information on all completed projects to provide a more evidence-based narrative within the appendix. And again, Avril Dickey is available for questions. Do you have any comments as well, Avril, before we proceed? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. If I can just add, really, for noting, key performance indicators that are not set nationally, they're currently under review and will form part of our service plans for 24-25, specifically for our justice service. The development of our business continuity plan, together with the completion of the business impact analysis, is currently being progressed, with an updated risk register forming part of the service plans going forward. Those plans will be presented to this committee in October. We'll have 2 service plans being presented, one for children, families and resettlement, and the second for our adult housing options and homelessness team. Going forward, future reporting on service plan deliverables will be reported with supplementary information to provide us with a more evidence-based story. Thank you.
That all sounds extremely positive, Avril, but do members have any comments or feedback for Avril and her team? Councillor Dorward, please. Thanks.
Just a comment, given that I was commenting on this the last time, so I really welcome this report. It's really positive, and the narrative is great. That's rather than having to think, or you know, it's all in front of me now, so I don't have to sort of second guess what it's trying to say. I guess a lot of work, so thank you very much for doing that. But it really makes our job easier in terms of scrutiny, so thank you very much for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. And Stephen, pardon me, would you like to come in? Thanks.
Yeah, Councillor Dowd, thanks for that. And again, thanks, Avril, for last report and this report. I think, though, what we will be bringing forward, as we've discussed throughout this committee in relation to data, scrutiny, answering questions, will give far more confidence than this is a standalone snapshot in time that just didn't do our business justice at the last committee. So delighted with the work that Avril and her colleagues have done. Just wanted to add that to your thanks as well.
Thank you, Stephen. Definitely in agreement with that. So we can now go to the recommendations. Are members happy to note the supplementary information of performance for Social Work Services Plan for the period 1st April 23 to 31st March 24, which includes the Council Plan delivery, Service Plan delivery and change and improvements as set out in the appendix. Thank you. We now go on to item number 9, Fostering and Adoption Inspection Update. This report provides an extensive update on the improvement work that has been undertaken across the fostering and adoption services. As members will note, this follows on from the briefing members were provided in February 24 by the Chief Social Work Officer and the information shared in the elected members seminar, which you have a copy of in this report on fostering and adoption in April 24. The report also highlights the most recent positive supported lodges inspection and that the service have been given formal notification for further inspection. Charles Rocks is available here and he is going to be answering any questions, but Charles, do you have anything further to add to the report, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to probably highlight that when I arrived in Dumfries and Galloway, this was a topic of early discussion because this had a bit of an impact for staff in terms of the recognition about the improvements that were required to take place. What I would want to note for members today is that the extensive effort and support that's went into the improvement actions by the team with some fantastic leadership, both from locality manager, team manager, the senior social workers, but the work has been put in to take on board the very difficult gradings and reflections from Care Inspectorate has been tremendous, and we recognise that the Care Inspectorate are back and there is a inspection that went live yesterday in regards to the Foster and Adoption Service, and we really do welcome the reflections that the Care Inspectorate will have that will provide us further scope around where we are just now in terms of our strengths and areas of development. But I just wanted to note a big thank you to staff who went above and beyond to take us into this position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. I too, as Chair, would like to commend yourself and your team for the work that's been undertaken, and I think it's hopefully positive going forward. I'm sure it will be. So, do members have any questions? Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Two things. I think you're right, Chair. The impact on the staff must have been immense, right? You know, talked about getting kicked in the teeth because the last inspection was a good inspection before that, and then this one wasn't so good. So, but a lot had happened in that time. So, they're getting re-inspected on next week. No, that's actually happening now. Yeah. It started yesterday, isn't it? 22nd already? Yeah. It's already started, so the outcome of that will give us a better idea of where we stand. My suggestion really is whilst it's really interesting to read, the proof of the pudding will be in the outcome of the inspection that's currently taking place, and we'll no doubt we'll get told about that in due course. In the meantime, I think it's incumbent on all of us to actually say thank you to the staff for working through this, because we didn't have a mass exodus, which we could have had. They've all buckled down and got on and accepted it and just and dealt with it professionally. So it's a well done to them for taking it on board. That's my comment on this.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Councillor Ferguson. You're quite right in absolutely everything you've said, so thank you. Do you wish to add to that, Charles, at all?
Yeah, just appreciate the kind comments, Councillor Ferguson. I think staff will appreciate this because it's been a difficult journey over the last 6 or 7 months. What would say we welcome Care Inspectorate coming in. We're really looking forward to demonstrate the improvement actions that have been taken forward. I suppose it's just recognising the support and lodging inspection as well, which utilises the same quality improvement methodology, the framework, to benchmark. So there's some overlaps and some positive signs we've seen through that inspection. And as I say, this has been through some fantastic leadership and oversight from the management leadership of the team. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charles. I do commend the work entirely. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I meant to say, actually, this is a really very small team within the department. So people are readily, easily identifiable. It'd be dead easy for them to hide, but they've stood up to it, and I just say, well done. We'll eat the pudding when it comes back to us from the inspectorate. They'll tell us whether it's worked or not. Let's hope it has.
Okay, well, hopefully it will, and I'm sure it will. Councillor Ferguson, thank you so much. So we can now go to the recommendations. Oh, Councillor Scobie, apologies.
Thanks, Chair. And I think I was cut off. No, you cut me off, but I was cut off in the previous report because I noticed on page 51, I think item 7, it refers to that 6 families are under foster assessment. And again, on terms of the report, just now under item 9, under 3.3, good progress has been made in achieving the necessary changes. However, it's been in a time of significant unprecedented pressure for service, including the shortage of foster carers, both locally and nationally. My question is really to ask if, and within the earlier report, it talks about Dumfries and Galloway, but then we've got it broken down again, area by area. And I believe, and maybe Stephen can confirm, that the West is particularly short of foster carers, which means any child who has to get into care has to go away from home at a fair distance away. Are we making any progress in terms of recruiting for each of the localities, particularly west of the region in Wigtonshire?
Thank you very much, Councillor Scobie. Charles, could you answer that? Thank you.
Yeah, we've done some analysis in this, Councillor Scobie, which I did identify some of the gaps that you refer to. We have a sort of recruitment drive campaign that's been ongoing, and looking at it from different mechanisms. It's some sort of local engagement in terms of events that takes place, that the team themselves set up a stall and trying to get into interactions around local conversations. You know, this is probably an area which we've had discussions prior to about the role of members themselves that can help support and push this forward at really local level, and signpost ourselves to any opportunities that we may have to put forward a message that we want about owning our children of Dumfries and Galloway and giving them the opportunities to be cared for and loved for as close as they possibly can be to their community. And as I said, I spoke about earlier on about, you know, driving forward that children's rights agenda. And I think it's unacceptable that children require to be so far from a distance of their school, their friends, and relationships that are important to them. So, you know, the team themselves have done some fantastic work here, but we would welcome any opportunity at local level that can help support this in terms of that engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. So I think we can go to recommendations. Are members happy to note 2.1, the ongoing work taking place to enhance and improve the fostering and adoption services as outlined in section 4. 2.2, the outcome of the supported lodgings inspection and the positive grades outlined in paragraph 3.5. And 2.3, the fostering and adoption service have been given formal notification of a further inspection, which commenced yesterday as outlined in paragraph 3.7. Now, I just want to make members aware that there's an LRB due at 2, so this might have to reconvene if we don't get finished. Not that I am wishing to rush us on in any way, but just to make you aware of that. So item 10, social work services, residential children's houses. The report informs members of the complexity and needs of experienced families and the need for alternative homes for children and young people in D&G. As members will note, it was agreed at the Social Work Services Committee in Feb 24 that a subsequent report be brought back to this committee in relation to alternative homes for children and young people on the provision of residential children's houses, some of which myself and Chrissy have been able to visit. Whereas this report is not providing members with options to consider, it does provide an update on the work being progressed by the service in the reimagining of children's house provision to enable the council to meet our corporate parent responsibilities and the needs of children in care. Charles Wilkes has done a fair amount of work on this and he is available to answer any questions. Charles, do you have anything to add to the report? Thank you.
Yeah, just briefly, we probably had already some extensive conversations and discussions around this, very much recognising you know, what our vision, aims and objectives would be for our children of Dumfries and Galloway who require residential care and support. And the report does highlight that our current capacity and provision for 4 children to be within a residential care home within Dumfries and Galloway does not level out in terms of the numbers that we've had over the last 10 years who require residential care. So this is a sort of position of where we're at just now, and the intention to come back to a future committee with a sort of options analysis, scoping with a business case about how we take that forward in regards to imagining and reimagining what our support will be to children who require residential care. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this, Charles, and the work you've done so far. It's much appreciated. Councillor Ferguson for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I don't know if it's fortunate or less fortunate. Actually, in the Cherry Social Work, when we had the home in across in the west as well, which I think the care inspector agreed with us, wasn't really the type of place where we should have young people who were needing help and support rather than it wasn't a great environment, let's put it that way. I'm also taking on board here about some of the comments. I was in a smaller service, it felt more homely and right for the children living there, because these kids are there and more because their circumstances, know what they've done per se, right? We need to get that right. So is the plan then, okay, and I hope I'm not jumping on Willie's bandwagon here, the Hardthorne Road was custom built. Right. Is the plan, as I spent to save, to do something further west? Or has that been thought through? Because there was a need, because the Cairnryan was always full, and a lot of Stranraer kids and the markers and all that were there. But Willie's right, it's a long way for somebody who's not done anything wrong to be 85 miles away from mum and dad or whatever, if we're putting that. So as part of this, this review and how we're looking at this, are we looking at potentially building a custom-built facility somewhere in the west of the region so that the travel for the youngsters involved and their families is minimal? Is that a fair ask? I think
Yeah, it's a good question, Councillor Ferguson, and we'll just pass over to Stephen because I think he'll have the answer for you. Thank you.
I'll pass over to Charles first, but what I will say is we've made no conclusion or judgment as to what the review that Charles has mentioned will look at. So Charles and his team are already analysing where the children lived before they came into care, where the need is, and wherever we need a building, we will ask for a building. What I would say is there's various ways to look at that, and it might not necessarily be us calling our own capital programme, for example, but I wouldn't want to prejudge what the work and our conversations with other partners would have. We're open-minded as to what this looks like. What I would say, though, you're absolutely right that old buildings that were never designed for children's houses are not fit for purpose. The Care Inspectorate are unlikely to give registration to an old house for a new purpose now. The only reason that we could use them previously is they were already in existence. I'm going to be really honest. If I was here when Hardthorne Road was being built and designed, I wouldn't have built and designed Hardthorne Road. It's huge for the small number of children that are there. It sticks out, it's readily identifiable, and there are much more modern ways to look at things. So Charles, please add.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. I'm always mindful about when I first qualified as a social worker, my first job that I had was working in a children's house, and it was a fantastic opportunity that I had. I was really blessed with that, but in the first children's house that I worked in, they were referred to as children units. There was 18 children over 2 levels that we worked with that we just didn't achieve anywhere near the outcomes that they deserved. And so I feel very passionate about getting this right in terms of that experience and journey that I have. We have the national review around care, the promise, which really profiled the standards we should be approaching around this. The intention here is recognising that children's house capacity is a necessary requirement for us. Children across Dumfries and Galloway regionally should have access, if that's what assessment is highlighting. What we're looking at is a range of options at this time that we would be able to explore either through partnership or through the council leading on that we will design a care model package through residential that will best meet needs. Now, through that requires partnership with the Care Inspectorate as well around regulation. The Care Inspectorate will no longer provide regulation and sign off of children's houses beyond a maximum of 4 children. And so we need to think about this in terms of design. We need to see what children's views would be, but what some of the analysis, information and data is telling us about where that demand is coming from, because we need to be representative across all children in Dumfries and Galloway. And I've learned in my first 14 weeks since I've been here is the east and west and the challenges of that and the sheer volume of distance in terms of children's experiences are important. And this will need to be pushed forward within a rights-based agenda as well for all children. So we'll absolutely do the right thing on that. The intention is to come back here with options that can provide some level of scrutiny with the business case, and then for views to be taken forward for us then as officers to lead on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Charles. Indeed, it's a very sensitive subject. So before yourself, Councillor Dorr, would like to come back in, Councillor Ferguson. Thanks.
Thanks. I really should have said it's not just the west, because we've got the same problem in the east. It's actually harder to get here from Langham, and Dennis will tell you, than it is to get here from Stranraer. So we've got it's the whole picture we need to look at. Yeah, but thanks anyway. Thanks for letting me back in.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson. Good points. Councillor Dorward, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for the report. Can I commend your responsivity in terms of the fact that we asked as a Labour group for this report because we had massive concerns about the amount of children being looked after out with the region and the capacity within the region to do this. And the massive, even bigger concerns about the now 23 children, I think, being looked after out with the region in private sector care provision. Now, yes, we've been, the initial agenda item 4, agenda item 5 looked at the cost of that, and that's concerning. But it isn't the costs that are concerning me, it's the fact that we have vulnerable and traumatised children and young people being, I don't know how far away from home they are. I don't know if it's probably mainly the Central Belt, I would imagine. I should have asked that question before. Wherever they are, it's horrendous. Now, I accept the fact that some children probably are best served being out with the region for specific reasons. That might be a minority of children. That's reasonable, but not 82%, as we have. I think my arithmetic is correct at the moment. It's appalling, and it's a local and national scandal. I think that we haven't really recognised. We recognise it now. We're doing something about it, but it's been going on for a long, long time. And to be quite frank about it, it's the same as the care home sector for older people. It's private sector that's come in and taken that over because it's financially lucrative. And if I can just quote something from the Financial Times, which for me represents how local authority provision has been taken over. It's not a political point, it's just a point of, by the private sector because it's financially lucrative. So this is from the Financial Times. Private equity and infrastructure funds have invested in children's care homes in the UK over the past decade, drawn by guaranteed taxpayer income. Even though local authorities are cash-strapped, they are legally obliged to provide children's care, giving reliable revenues even in times of recession. That's quite appalling and quite sad. And other economic shocks. One analyst called the market red hot. So it's one where you invest in. And that's where we shouldn't be. And it's not, I'm not criticising social work services, I'm not criticising even Dumfries and Galloway Council, because every council in Scotland will be in the same boat, and every council in England and Wales and probably Northern Ireland will be in the same boat. We as a country, not we sitting here, have let this happen. And we're now sitting with 23 of our children out with the region. And I don't think with a great deal of oversight as to what's happening with them. That's not intentional, I think that's just how it is. I'm not sure about that. You can answer that question, Stephen, if you don't mind. But basically we're letting down one of our most important assets. And you mentioned before the fact that when those children and young people leave Dumfries and Galloway, depending on what age they are, they very often won't come back, so they start identifying with wherever it is they're living. And one of the things in your report that you gave to us, the demographics, are that we are an increasingly ageing population. So we're not doing ourselves any favours by, I'll use the word exporting, and that doesn't sound right, and I don't mean that in a bad way, exporting one of our most valuable assets out with the region because they won't come back. So I really welcome this, and I'm really, really pleased in terms of responsivity. That's really good to know. I'm not going to try and second guess what you're going to do. I get the kind of parameters around. I need to get used to the information. Children's houses, is it 4 or 5 individuals that can, as opposed to the bigger capacity that probably I was more familiar with in my younger days. That's challenging, that's not easy, but we're spending £7 million a year on care that is probably reasonably okay. I don't know. I'm not suggesting it's, but we don't know exactly what that care is, and it would be better for us and more responsive as a council to have that care done locally, where possible, rather than outsourcing it. And I'm not again working with the private sector to achieve that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dorward. I think there's already been a great deal of work taken on by the team with regards to this, and I think we will be pleasantly surprised with some of their very creative ideas. So I'll put you over to Stephen, though. Thanks.
One particular point I wanted to pick up on, Councillor Dodd, was the oversight. What I can assure our committee is that our social work staff do have excellent oversight over the children who are placed out with, and that's at tremendous cost of time, etc., to our staff as well as to the children who live out with. But what we also know, and Charles referenced this earlier, is that outcomes for children who are placed out with our region are no better and often worse because of that distance than what they would be locally. From a professional perspective and from a human perspective, you're absolutely right that this care should be provided in Dumfries and Galloway, and it's our ambition to get as much of this delivered locally as possible, apart from in those exceptional as opposed to ordinary circumstances that we're currently seeing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Stephen. So I think we can now go to the recommendations. Our members, oh no, pardon me.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, come in, Councillor Wilson. Pardon me.
Just a wee quick question. I was just wondering how many private residential homes there is in the region, please. Thank you.
Charles, do you have the exact figure of the number of homes? I know the number of beds that are available within those different houses.
I don't know the number. I could get that, but I think it's around 20 from last part, what I remember. Councillor, what we recognise is that we are, Dumfries and Galloway is placed in an area where you find quite short enterprise schemes that do originate around the private model because of the close proximity to England and some local authorities where we have children placed across border region, and I know we don't always get notification consistently of who these children are within our region. Thanks.
Over to yourself, Stephen.
I tend to measure things by number of children as opposed to the number of houses, and when we last counted we were looking at 69 beds available that don't belong to the council, and we only had 6 of our own children placed in those external placements locally. So that was over 60 children, predominantly from England, not exclusively, but predominantly placed from England and other parts of Scotland as well, though. So that has a consequential impact on us locally in terms of education and supports that are out there in terms of what we do. So it is significant that not only are we placing our children into what we call private care placements, but almost all of them are out with our region, even though we have more available beds locally. We have tried to broker in the past deals with some of the providers so we could keep our children locally. But if I'm being honest, the deprivation of liberty orders in England, it changed the market whereby we were priced out. We couldn't purchase, beds that were becoming vacant to move children in because we couldn't afford to.
Interesting, Stephen, thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Stephen kind of answered what I was going to say there, because if we are going to get figures, we need to get figures about how many of our own children are actually accommodated in Dumfries and Galloway as opposed to children from outside Dumfries and Galloway. Having said that, once they're here, they're our responsibility, am I right? To a certain extent? No.
Stephen, please.
So, I'm going to use language that I don't like, but it's language that we use. So it's effectively the host authority. But the placing authority, whether that's from England, Wales, Northern Ireland or Scotland, remain legally responsible for the child. But there are a couple of caveats. One is education has to be delivered where the child lives. So some of those placements that are in Dumfries and Galloway that are looking after other children will also have a residential element to them, but some of those children go to our schools. What our schools colleagues can do is negotiate the additional support that's required with the placing authority so we can get income to increase staff, and that does happen. But what that means is the small numbers of skilled staff that we have working in our schools are not always looking after our most vulnerable, but other people's most vulnerable as well. The other caveat is that health is delivered locally by the health board as opposed to obviously being delivered elsewhere. But what that has for those children, and I care for all children, and I'm passionate about all children, not just Dumfries and Galloway's children. The children who come here have to start health processes again in the same way that our children who move out with have to start health processes as well. So it's a complex picture, but the responsibility doesn't sit with us. But see, when something goes wrong, we pick up the pieces. So if a child needs child protection, we'll start our processes to safeguard the child, and then we'll involve the other agencies. Similarly, if a child is admitted to hospital, whether that be DGRI or sometimes Mid-Park, unfortunately, our health service have to pick up those immediate responses, as do our local police.
Yeah, I think the reason I was asking the question, because I'm going to cast my mind back here to pre-2012 when I was elected as a councillor. There was something about your primary place of residence or words to that effect. If you were a permanent resident here, you then became our responsibility, not him. That was for learning disability. And I think that's still the same, because we had a hell of a mess to clear out in terms of cost to this authority, for lack of better words, or I hate using those words. A place not a million miles down west of just off the A, not the A75, you know, it makes cheese and stuff like that, that's all I'll say, right? Because people have been a resident there for a number of years, and the authorities down south just stopped paying for them. I mean, do we have the same situation? Is that situation still there now, or has that been rectified?
So the question of ordinary residence is predominantly for adults, but not always. So when a child is placed here on a legal order from another authority, that's what we're speaking about, the people who are making that capacitous decision are either a court of law or a children's hearing, and they're making that decision, and the authority where the child originally lived retain responsibility. When they become an adult, that's different in terms of if they have additional needs that they require from any local authority area, they would choose to live themselves in Scotland or elsewhere. When they become an adult, those responsibilities get passed on to wherever they choose to live, if they have capacity. If they don't have capacity, that's when we get into the ordinary resident arguments and debates, and there's a complex legal system that we have to follow, and ultimately if the two local authorities don't decide, the Secretary of State makes a decision. So I think that's the space that you're speaking about, but not for this paper, and I would suggest a conversation another day, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a good point, Stephen. I think you've made very valid points, Councillor Ferguson, as always, and perhaps in the next paper coming forward, a small paragraph might be relevant for members, just with a bit more detail on that, if that's possible. Would you accept that? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move forward, if that's all right with members. We're going to recommendations. Are members happy to 2.1, note the position in relation to numbers of residential placements as set out in paragraph 3.2 and the cost of residential placements as set out in paragraph 3.3 for the period 23-24, and 2.2, agree that a business case will be presented at this committee in October 24 to provide a new model of delivery for residential children's houses with a view for more children to live in ordinary houses, reduce residential placement costs, and fewer children and young people will hopefully be placed out of in care, will hopefully not be placed out of authority. So we now go on to item number 11, delivering the promise. The intention of this report is to present elected members with an update on D&G's commitment to deliver on the promise together with the Scottish Government's future direction. The report sets out key highlights on work that we have progressed across D&G. This is a multi-agency approach delivering on this agenda, including social work, housing options and homelessness, education, local colleges, health and third sector organisations. Future reports will include outcome and impact on the work that's being progressed locally. Avril Dickey's here to answer any questions. And Avril, do you have any further comments to make? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. If I can just add, we're aware COVID-19 radically altered the landscape across Scotland. However, the impact of COVID did not change the core work programme on delivering on the promise. The Scottish Government Promise Scotland team, they've now launched the Plan 2430, which celebrates how we've travelled in delivering the promise across Scotland, whilst being clear on the distance still to travel. So there's concern nationally that given the ambition for change set out in the plan, the scale of ambition and the change required may not be fully acknowledged in the timescale that's set out, and that's a national concern. As noted in the report, the Promise's local governance arrangements was undertaken as part of a wider exercise with strategic oversight and governance being aligned now with the Children's Services Strategic and Planning Executive Partnership Group as part of the delivery of our corporate parent plan. So the corporate parent plan is due for refresh early next year, and work is currently progressing to capture the overall work to date, the future action, and key to this, capturing the voice of our children, families and carers. So the report will form part of the corporate parent plan going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avril. And we have Councillor Jameson. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the report. It's really interesting. I'm referring to page 187, 4.3.1, under a good childhood, which reference an introduction of care experience teams in our schools, whose role is to work with primary and secondary pupils to raise attainment with a focus on literacy, numeracy and health and well-being, and to support young people to address any barriers. I suspect it's early days yet, but it's a really important piece of work, given the challenges that these sort of the children that we're talking about here. How big is the team? How does it work with schools? And do you have any outcomes on the literacy and numeracy of children that are involved?
Thanks, Councillor Jameson. Avril, are you okay to answer? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Jameson. We're currently working with our education colleagues on that in future reports. We don't have the statistics and data as of now, but we will certainly get those for future committees on the number of staff across the region and the impact that that's having on our statistics and data.
Thank you, Avril. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. We will go to the recommendations. Are members happy to 2.1 note our commitment to keep the promise, and 2.2 note the future direction as set out with the Scottish Government's Plan 24 to 30 that launched on June 2024 and published by the Promise Scotland as noted at paragraphs 4.8 to 4.10. We move on to item number 12 now, members, which is the CPO annual report. The report outlines the legislative requirements for the provision of the Community Payback Order annual report and highlights a number of the key areas of performance with some comparison with other local authorities. Recent visits to the unpaid work and programme delivery units and community teams offices across the region and the Justice Social Work Unit at Her Majesty's Prison Dumfries from the Chief Social Work Officer and Chair and Vice Chair of Social Work Committee allowed Justice Social Work staff to share the unit's developments and the high quality work undertaken within service users. All involved found visits very interesting and were impressed with what they heard and saw, and I can vouch for that. They would encourage other elected members to take up the open offer to visit any of the unpaid work and programme delivery units across the region. Of additional note is the recent positive feedback received following an unannounced Director of Safety visit to King Street, the unpaid work and programme delivery unit in Dumfries, and you can get some very nice bird hutches and things there as well. Catherine Knight's available to answer any questions. And Catherine, do you have anything to add to the report? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I was just going to open with a couple of contextual comments. It'll be helpful to be aware that the direction of travel currently with the national justice agenda, in very simplistic terms, is a shift from custody to community. So in general terms, we do expect that in future demand on justice social work services will be increasing. And it's also worth noting that the lifting of the embargo on future community payback order and annual reports, and therefore in future there will be a shorter timescale between the preparation of the report and being able to bring it to committee for yourselves.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thanks for the detailed report and the work you've put into that. Has any members got any questions? No? Okay, thank you. Oh, pardon me, sorry, Councillor Dorward, thanks.
I know time is of the essence, but it's interesting timetabling, but anyway, I'll leave that for a different day. I always speak to this report because I think it's fantastic and really well done, and I think it's people don't recognise the fantastic work done by the team that work with individuals who are in the justice sector, who are in the community. It's welcome to know that the movement is going from custody to community. Not fast enough, I don't think. I know that in terms of resourcing it's challenging, but I think that's the proper direction of travel for this country, indeed. I was talking to my Labour group colleagues, and we will arrange a visit, get in touch with you to arrange a visit to come out, and I think they need to, I've been out already, but they haven't, so to see what's going on. But in terms of the workload, you know, it's gratifying to know that you're getting more requests for reports. That's fantastic, and that's obviously you're doing a good job, so I think that's reflective of the work you do. But how are you managing that in terms of resourcing? How's that working out? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dorward. Over to yourself again, Catherine. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Dorward, and thank you for your positive comments, and you're always welcome to come and see what it is we're up to. Certainly, undoubtedly, the courts continue to place high demands on us in terms of the number of reports requested. We take that as a positive, that they find them helpful. Without a doubt, it has challenges in terms of resourcing that. the preparation of a criminal justice social work report is a task that has to sit with a qualified social worker, and obviously Stephen has already spoken about the ongoing challenges across the sector to employ and to find social workers, which for justice social work specifically is a new challenge. Previously we did attract qualified social workers, but that is becoming more challenging. In terms of how we've gone about addressing that, it's prioritising those tasks within justice social work that need to sit with a qualified worker. So that would be the assessments that are prepared for the reports and the more challenging behaviour change work that we undertake with the higher risk offenders. And again, as Stephen alluded to, we are able to recruit to paraprofessionals and social work assistants who can undertake the lower level risk work. So it's really being clearer that we use the qualified resource to its most efficient and effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I have councillors. Oh, pardon. Councillor Drummond.
That's okay. I know there was a bit of I've forgotten what I was going to say now. You've completely interrupted my train of thought. Is that I know what I was going to say. Is that sustainable over the medium to long term?
We will make it sustainable, I suppose, is the correct answer. Certainly, we are in ongoing dialogue with Scottish Government in terms of where the challenges continue to be. And indeed, as referred to, I think, in a previous report, we did receive additional funding this year, which was certainly welcomed. But if you then can't recruit to the post you need, then the challenges continue. I can give you assurances that certainly myself and Gail, and obviously Charles as well, we focus on ensuring that we always meet the statutory responsibilities that the service has.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you indeed. First of all, I have Councillor Slater, then Councillor Little. So Councillor Slater, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report, Kathleen. The question I'm asked quite often is, sorry, I'm a little bit dry in my throat. The question I want to ask is, a lot of people out there are asking this question, what do our community payback people actually doing? And I think if there was some way, Kathleen, that could be made easier for the community to understand the good work you're actually doing, that would help people who ask these questions understand that there is work going on, good work going on, and on into the future. So that's the question that I'm asked. What are these people actually doing? So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Slater. To be fair, until you've visited the unit, it's quite an eye-opener when you do, so I would encourage you to do so. But Catherine, if you could elaborate. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Slater. My goodness, what do? We do all sorts. I think I would completely agree the best way is to come and see what it is we actually do. I think I've spoken about this in the past, about the shift from community service as was to unpaid work now means that the service users engaged with community payback are now a far broader range of people with a broader range of challenges and issues that they're facing, and therefore our role now of identifying an appropriate placement that meets the risk, the need, the achievements of what we aim for a community payback to have a positive impact on. We have pushed in the development of personal placements because they can often mean that a person can get through the hours much quicker and that the outcomes in terms of future employment opportunities and skills learnt is greater. We have a greater number of people who really have to stay within the units because of their needs in terms of mental health issues or physical disabilities, personality disorders, etc. So there's then the middle group who go out on the projects that are probably the things that people think about when they think about unpaid work. In terms of those, we will respond to any referral that comes our way, providing it meets the criteria. And for a lot of those, it is your grounds maintenance, it's beach clearances, it's creating things for parks, play parks. We make a lot of things for schools, for the schools to play with, for school kids to play with. It's as broad can be, and would certainly encourage people, if they are asking you the question, please send them in my direction, and I would be more than happy to answer questions directly if that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That's interesting.
It's not working right. So it's not for myself. I know you do good work, but it's for the wider community. When projects are done, is there any way that it could be said that and the wider community is actually told the good work you're doing, rather than them have to ask questions? That's really the point I'd like to make it.
Okay,
not for myself, but for the wider community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Slater. I think we'll certainly look into that. We could look at a small campaign on Facebook or something just to keep people updated. I think that's a good suggestion.
Certainly open to any suggestions, and I think it's probably an issue across social work as well, to get the good news stories out there instead of press being full of perhaps the not so good, but certainly a good point, and happy to engage with any.
We'll pick up on that, Councillor Slater. Thank you so much, and obviously the professionals can guide the rest of us on that one. Councillor Little, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. As Councillor Dorward's opinion, I'm a huge advocate of this. I think the majority of people should not be in prison, and I think this service is fantastic, not just for the community, but for those themselves that are undertaking these orders. I like how we're doing so well locally. I always like to see that. It's always a great report, and I really look forward to this report. And it's especially good to see the service users' comments and how it has affected their lives positively. Are we doing so well? Got 2 or 3 questions. Are we doing so well because our courts are more supportive of this locally? Because I know you were saying there's a shift more throughout the whole country to move towards this, but we've been doing really well with this locally for quite some time. So there's that. And is there any increase in organisations being on board, you know, to provide the more variety of work? I know we had lots of different things, and then through COVID it came down and it was difficult for people to actually do their hours. And I know that's come back up again. But do we have an increase in organisations coming on board with this? Do we reach out to them? And also, third last question is, how can organisations access this service? I've spoken to people before who've needed things done, and I said, if you thought about reaching out to Community Payback, it would be perfect for you, and they didn't realise that that was an option. So how do we sort of advertise that service in the best positive way that we can?
Thank you very much for the range of questions there, Councillor Little. I'm sure the answer is yes to some of those. I think in terms of the increased demand, I take that to mean that the courts are happy with the service provided. Certainly there is a definite national push to promote how robust a community sentence is. There is clearly the risk that the media will often pick up as it's a soft option, but certainly I've been in enough groups with men addressing the domestic abuse that they will often say actually going to prison would be easier because the challenge of actually facing up to what you've done. So I think there is both a national and a local challenge out there to advise the public what it is we do and how we do it, and why the outcomes are far more successful through a community sentence than through a custodial. In terms of, we certainly have returned to pre-COVID times in terms of projects out there. I would say, I think, as I've mentioned in a couple of reports that I brought to you, we didn't really experience that great a dip during COVID in terms of demands, but clearly the nature of how we could provide the hours changed. We are always on the lookout for agencies out there, agencies and organisations, community council, third sector, that we can assist with. I think in the papers there is a link to the referral form. That's a link to the referral form that's on the Dumfries and Galloway Council website. I will be the first to admit it's not the easiest thing to find when you're on the website, and therefore please cascade it amongst people that you think will be interested. And I suppose it links back as well to how we share the good news stories. We also need to be better at sharing that this is how we can continue to assist the communities out there. I hope that has answered your question.
It has, and I think if we take it as a bit of an action point going forward, I think that would be a great proposal. But thank you again for the report. And last question is from Councillor Little. Thank you. Hill, get it right. Sorry, everyone.
Thank you, Chair. No, I just want to comment on the report. I think it's great. I think the work that you do is great. I've thoroughly enjoyed going on the visits into Dumfries Prison. My first experience of going into a prison, meeting the social workers there and seeing their challenges and speaking to them. It really opens your eyes and gives you a broader picture of what that aspect of social work is about, the social justice. And then going to the community payback and speaking to some of the service users and hearing their stories about, you know, if they've had an addiction and they've had an offence and they've been punished for it. It's about their rehabilitation. It's about them coming back into society. It's about them gaining some skills, but also not just skills for work, but personal skills and having a routine. And the staff work so hard. They really do, under the pressures that they have. So I just want to thank you, and I wanted to highlight that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hill, much appreciated. So we can now go to the recommendations. Are members happy to 2.1, note the completion of our requirement to submit a report to Community Justice Scotland as outlined in the appendix. 2.2, note from the statistical information given the significant and ongoing demands placed on justice social work. And 2.3, note the positive impact of community payback on service users, unpaid work beneficiaries and the wider community. Thank you. So we now go on to item number 13, Housing Options and Homeless Service Annual Assurance Statement. The Annual Assurance Statement is a way for boards and committees to declare that they're assured their organisation complies with regulatory requirements and standards, or to disclose areas where they need to improve. This is provided on a yearly basis and is a requirement of all local authorities and RSL to complete this ahead of the 31st of October deadline. Elected members are asked to note and agree to sign off this statement, which is in relation to assurances for the 23-24 reporting year. Rebecca Aldridge is here and available to answer any questions. You want to come in, Rebecca?
Yes,
thanks.
It's just to note, obviously, this is the first time this statement will come to the Social Work Committee. It's obviously gone previously to other committees. The information in it reflects, as we know, the current crisis within homeless and housing, and there'll be more details coming through from that in terms of the local action plan that the Scottish Government's been asked, that we've been asked to provide on that crisis. Also, the information we'll get via data sets, and the adult service plans will include housing and homeless options as well. So it was just to note that, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
No, that seems a good explanation. Thank you very much. Councillor Dorward.
Thank you, Chair. I do acknowledge this has been, as part of the restructuring, transferred across to social work services, which is challenging to get your head around. So put that out there in the first instance. That's not an easy thing to do since April or whenever it was. I think the challenge is we've declared a housing emergency in this region, and that's been agreed by every single elected member. And we're not able to provide an assurance statement in terms of or potentially in terms of temporary accommodation, which is challenging. So we have other issues to deal with as well, because temporary rent control legislation has come to an end, which is challenging, and the affordable housing budget has been slashed as well, which is challenging. So whilst it isn't entirely in social work services remit to address the housing shortage in Dumfries and Galloway, in fact it's not in the social work services remit, but it's your remit to provide the statement of assurance, which is interesting. How are you going to work with colleagues in other departments across the council in this, what's it called, the one council or one council model, to address this, which is, I mean, we shouldn't be putting people into bed and breakfast. That's not, you know, it's better than not having, than the alternative, which is nothing. But we know how, we've spoken about, you know, we're not focusing just on children, but we've spoken about how challenging that is for children to be in temporary accommodation like of that sort, or hotels or anything like that. So, yeah, back to my question, how do we work across the council to make this better? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Durward. Stephen, please. Thanks.
I'll make a brief response and then pass over to Rebecca if she's got anything to add. So clearly this service being part of our directorate is brand new. It's from April. This report is for a previous year. And just an explanation as to why it's come here from a governance perspective and the timing that this has to go back. We are the committee that does own it in the future, and we felt it was appropriate to bring it now, even though it was from a previous year. In terms of as we move forward, we work very closely with all other council directorates here, and particularly with Jamie Little in relation to, you know, his role. And I suppose as we move forward, it's the combination of what we need to provide to you around assurance for the homeless options and housing statutory function in terms of how we deliver that for the council. But also if we're looking at the new subcommittee in relation to tackling inequality and poverty, and what business comes there as well. And we'll address that in a seminar. What we have done as a council is we've nominated myself as the proper officer for that committee, so we've got continuity in terms of leadership for that from a council perspective, so we will absolutely bring that together. What I would say though is I think the fit is good, because the level of vulnerability around people who are homeless and need to look at those housing options, quite often similar people that we work with in children's services, adult services, and indeed justice services. So I think it fits well, and I think the synergies from a one council perspective as we move forward will improve. There's bound to be some bumps in the road, to use a phrase from earlier, but confident that we can deliver that. As in the reporting, in terms of the housing emergency, that is a very different set of circumstances, but that plan will come forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Durward. And we have 5 minutes left in this meeting, it seems to be saying. Have you anything to add to that, Rebecca?
I would just echo Stephen's statements on that, and also that what we do understand, we work really closely with our registered social landlords, because obviously we have no stock of our own within the local authority. But we also recognise, as Stephen's noted, that actually a lot of the people, it is a really good fit actually with social work, because a lot of the people that come into homeless services, for example, they get there as a consequence of other, you know, life consequences. So we are working. What we do know is we can't allocate our way out of this crisis. So it is about concentrating more on early intervention, concentrating on how we use the stock we have currently with our registered social landlords, etc. And I met yesterday with Jamie Little in that respect to kind of just to begin those conversations. So I'm hopeful, as Stephen suggested, that we will have a better understanding and some good action points that will come from the various groups in terms of how we support people in these circumstances. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you, Rebecca. Councillor Slater, I think you've got a legacy hand up from the last agenda item. And to the last question from yourself, Councillor. Well, just wait, because there's someone before you. Sorry, Councillor Ferguson, please. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate you've inherited this. So one of the questions here is about the Gypsy Traveller place here. It's well documented. I was dragged to Edinburgh and had my bum scalped well and truly because of the lack of movement in this council, and particularly around Thistle Grove. And it took the council kicking and screaming, to be honest, to actually agree to do something constructive about it. So the question around it really is, it's appreciate it's signed by Pauline, but I appreciate somebody's written it for you, probably written it for you, Pauline. Where are we with the Scottish housing regulator? Because they have got their eyes all over this and have done for some years. And the project implementation plan, conduct formal further engagement and consultation and relevant stakeholders as appropriate. Reporting of the implementation will be through the appropriate committees or full council. When can we expect that?
That's a good question. Over to yourself, Stephen, please. Thanks.
Yeah, Councillor Ferguson, thanks for the question, a very important one. Just for context, and you already know this, this is a statement as to what happened last year. We've clearly got that decision to move forward now. So colleagues across the council are looking at what's required, and how we identify the best way to utilise the site, improve the site, etc. So what we'll ensure is that whichever committee or full council that this needs to come back to, it will do. I'll speak to colleagues across the council who are leading on the work and can come back to the members of this committee off table in terms of a timescale and which committee, possibly full council. I don't want to commit full council to that, but we'll get back to you if that's okay in terms of the timelines around that, if that's okay. Thank you.
Sorry, Helen. Can that include actually what engagement we've had, further engagement with the housing regulator and Scottish Government? Because we need to know exactly where we are, because we were on statutory notice at one stage.
Yeah,
I think that's been removed temporarily, just temporarily.
Yeah. Absolutely, I think you're right, Councillor Ferguson. Thank you for that. And Councillor Slater, please, to finish. Thanks.
Yes, it's about social housing. The question is really, we sold all our stock off a number of years ago. Was that the right thing to do? Now we're in a third-party situation where we have to go and plead with these companies, can you do this? At one time we could say we will do this. So maybe it's time we should maybe be looking to have more of our own housing back as such, or maybe build some, because that would take us out of the third-party situation. Thank you.
Reflection's always a great thing, Councillor Slater. So, you know, this housing strategy will be coming forward, so we'll give you some detail on that in the future. And I think, yes, as you say, we're going to have to work differently, aren't we, and smarter, as we always have to do in life. So thank you for that comment. So I think we can now go to the recommendations if everyone's happy. 2.1, we've noted the process for the production of the annual assurance statement as detailed in section 4 of the report. And 2.2, agreed the assurance statement to the Scottish Housing Regulator 23. Oh, there's an error, sorry. Is that right? Should be 23-24, I think, as detailed in the appendix to the report. Thank you, members. So item number 14 is the PPC minute from the 16th of April 2024. Is everybody happy with that? Thank you. Yes, Stephen, if you'd like to come in, thanks.
Members, just like to remind you that in the past you've only ever received the minute from the Public Protection Committee and you don't see some of the work that goes on from a social work perspective. Hence us providing you with the data sets and the analysis from adult support and protection, children, violence against women and girls, so you'll have more information about the details of the work that we do on your behalf as we move forward.
Thank you, Stephen. That's very helpful and positive. And item number 15, any other business? Well, I'd like to say, I forgot to say at the start, welcome back after the summer recess, everyone. It's good to see you. I hope you're well rested for the rest of the year. And I have no other business. I really thank you all for your attendance and participation today, everybody. And good luck to those going straight into the next meeting. Thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you, everyone here.